Hello and welcome to the Miskatonic Playhouse. My name is Lynne Hardy and I will be your keeper of arcane law for the following proceedings, Curate and Curability by the Honourable Mr. SR Sellens. The year is 1812 and His Highness George, the Prince Regent, has made Brighton quite the place to be seen, and it is in Brighton that we are joined by Miss Janitra Chatterjee, ably played for us by Lydia, from the Miskatonic Playhouse and The Stars Are Right. Lydia, could you tell us a little bit about Miss Chatterjee, please?
Yes, hi everybody. It's great to be here. As Lynn said, I'm playing Miss Janitra Chatterjee. She is a young lady of a privileged background. She lives in a beautiful manor house. She's grown up with every comfort, every luxury you could imagine. She's a very happy person, and she's always finely dressed in the best of fashions and really keeps her ears to the ground in terms of local style and what's coming up for the best of the season. And her great joy in life is matchmaking.
Which is quite handy, considering that you are actually in Brighton for the season. How old are you, Miss Chatterjee?
I am 20 years old, and I've had very little to vex me in those 20 years.
You're then a very lucky young woman. But of course, the dearest aim of your family is for you to get married, which is one of the reasons why you are in Brighton, and you are staying with friends of your family, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
You're staying with Mr. and Mrs. Hampton, who have no children of their own and have therefore been rather over-solicitous this season. Now, you also have two particular friends that you have made during your time in Brighton, Miss Harriet Fenchurch, the cousin of Sir Jasper Dulfrey, and a Miss Eleanor Mortimer, whose brother, the Reverend Henry Mortimer, suffered a bereavement last year. So that's the setup, that's the background for where we start. Now, as people may or may not know, I am a huge fan of the luck rolls in Call of Cthulhu, and we're going to be using those this evening. So, Lydia, I would like you to roll luck for Miss Chatterjee. So that's 3d6 and then multiplied by 5, please.
Okay, 3d6. I've just rolled 7. That's not great, is it?
Oh, that's terrible. No, roll that again.
For somebody who's meant to have had such a nice growing up.
No, it's really not.
Okay, right. Doing it again. Oh, that's a bit better. 14 that time. Okay.
Oh, that's much better. So that's 70 luck points.
Oh, that's not bad, is it?
That's good. That's twice what you had before, so that's definitely much better.
Absolutely.
Now, as I said, listeners, the year is 1812. More specifically, it is Wednesday, the 16th of September, and it is the day of the last grand ball at the Brighton Assembly Rooms. But first, we find Miss Chatterjee at the Modiste, New Street, a very, very reputable dressmaking establishment run by Madame Gilbert, and Miss Chatterjee is there for the final adjustments to her dress for this evening. And you are there, Miss Chatterjee, with your dear friend Harriet, and as your chaperone, Mrs. Hampton. What would you like to do?
I think she's browsing the accessories. She's looking at the gloves and she's looking at the shawls. She's very much interested in bringing out her background as well. She was born in Kolkata, Bengal, and there's all these lovely new printed Indian cottons which are lately arriving in Brighton, and she's thinking she'd like to maybe get some gold trim or something like that to just kind of give a little nod to her heritage as well, because they're also in fashion at this point.
They are indeed, and Madame Gilbert compliments you on your taste. Oui, ma petite, yes, of course, we should be able to get this added to the detail to your dress for this evening. This should be no problem. You will look radiant as always. I must say you are a wonderful model for my wear. I have had so much extra custom from people seeing my creations that you have worn at the balls this year. I take it you are excited for this evening, my dear.
Oh, absolutely. It's the highlight of the season. I wouldn't miss it, and I have to thank you for these gorgeous creations you've been making for me this season, and I shall make sure to tell all my friends when I get back to town.
Ah, ma petite. Oh, merci beaucoup. With you as well, you have Harriet. Now, she's 19 years old. She's a little bit younger than you. She is a romantic at heart. She tends to be quite boisterous and gushing, and she's been a great supporter of you. Obviously, you are away from home. You didn't really know anybody when you got to Brighton. And Harriet and Eleanor, Miss Mortimer, have been a great support to you. Now, Eleanor, you're not quite sure where she is. You thought she was going to meet you here this morning, but Harriet is positively buzzing with excitement about the ball this evening.
Well, Harriet, tell me, what are you going to wear tonight? We should coordinate. We should make sure that our clothes are the same and will make such a wonderful entrance if we're in complementary colours.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic idea. Oh yes. Obviously, I have my dress already. And I had to get a new dress for Jasper's ball at the weekend. But yes, maybe some accessories. Oh yes, I think accessories would be fantastic. And there's some beautiful ribbons and maybe some brooches. Do you think feathers would be good? I think feathers might be quite interesting.
Oh, feathers. Absolutely, but you don't want to tickle the gentleman's nose when you're dancing with him, do you, my dear?
Oh no, that's quite true. But my dear Lieutenant Wadsworth, he doesn't mind. He quite likes feathers. He's so handsome. I know you haven't met him yet. And I don't think he's going to be there this evening. Don't you just love a man in uniform, my dear Janitra?
Oh yes, very dashing, very stylish. And such bravery as well.
Oh yes, my dear lieutenant is terribly brave. And I know he's only in the militia, but he's such a charming gentleman. I do hope you can meet him before the season, before everybody goes home again. I suppose you've seen Captain King at the balls. You must have done. Naval officer, terribly exciting. Not quite as good as the militia, I suppose. Bit wet. I don't really like boats. You surely must have seen him.
Have I seen Captain King, Keeper?
You have, but you, for all Harriet's gushing, you already know that his interests have been taken by a young woman called Georgiana Dilwyn, who's a clergyman's daughter from Wales. They both seem quite concerned with the welfare of the lower ranks. You've seen them at various different balls chatting about this, most earnestly in corners. So as much as Harriet likes the idea of people in uniform, you're fairly certain that he's already spoken for.
Well, he sounds like a wonderful gentleman, but perhaps not to my taste.
Oh, do you not like boats either?
Well, I don't really think I've been on that many boats. Well, not that I can remember. But the captain seems like a man who's already got his eye on a very suitable match for him.
Oh, you mean the Welsh girl? Yes, I suppose so. Let's see, who else are the eligible bachelors there this year? Oh, so many of them are rather old. They're positively ancient. They're 26 and 27. Goodness, who else? Obviously there's my cousin, Sir Jasper. He's a bit strange, but he's quite entertaining and fun. You could do worse. He has a lovely estate. Oh, and then, I suppose... No, I wouldn't have thought that Eleanor's brother would be looking for anyone quite so soon after his wife's death. But I suppose you never know. I suppose they might be a little bit dull, but Eleanor's very sweet. I suppose her brother might be too.
Well, it's possible. Let's see what happens tonight. Anything can happen at these kind of events, can't they?
Oh, it can.
But we have to find somebody nice for you as well, my dear.
Oh no, I don't need anyone. Like I said, my Lieutenant Wadsworth, he's my beau. Obviously we haven't told anyone about that particularly yet. I do believe he'll be going to Jasper's ball at the weekend. I'm assuming to ask Jasper's permission for my hand in marriage.
My word.
I know. Isn't
That's
it exciting?
It is. It really is. So, but tell me more about Cousin Jasper then.
Oh, well, he's rather the libertine. Well, at least that's what people say. He hosts wonderful parties, although they do get quite boisterous. maybe he's not quite the right person for you. You're such a sensible soul and so respectable. But I mean, they are very fun. Perhaps we can get him to dance with you tonight. But I did hear, actually, that the Reverend Mortimer will be there this evening, so at least we'll get to see him. And I mean, like I said, you never know. Country vicars. Perfectly respectable and charming. I hear he's worth quite a bit, too.
Ah, so many possibilities.
And at that, Mrs. Hampton, her ears perk up. She's been, like I said, very solicitous. And she wanders over and starts twittering about the two of you, trying to direct you towards various what she thinks are appropriate items to accessorise your clothing, which, to be quite frank, are rather last century.
Yes, I think I'd like to stick with my first instinct. These are beautiful, but perhaps a little classic.
Classic, yes, I suppose that is a good description, my dear. Yes, you young ladies, yes, you are blazing a trail of your own, I suppose, yes. As long as there's nothing too risque, obviously your parents did entrust me with finding a suitable husband for you, my dear. We couldn't, well, we don't want to do anything to harm your reputation now, do we? But I'm sure Madame Gilbert will steer you in the right direction. She has such marvellous taste. We're so lucky to have her.
I have no doubt of it, but these are lovely, as I said. Will you be wearing these tonight?
Oh, my dear, you really shouldn't encourage me to spend Mr. Hampton's money, but now you suggest it, yes, perhaps I will. Yes, a little bit more, decoration, and nothing too ostentatious, of course. But yes, I think, definitely these pieces. And she picks out some lace and little bits of ribbon to put on her cap and things. As you're watching. And by the time proceedings are finished, you have some new evening gloves, you have various different accessories. Madame Gilbert promises to have the dress delivered to you with your new gold trim in plenty of time for the ball. Is there anything that Miss Chatterjee would like to do before she heads home to start her preparations for this evening's festivities?
I don't think so. I think she might just take her companions for a cup of tea, perhaps, in a tea house.
There is a very nice tea house near the Stane, which is one of the main areas that people go to be seen in Brighton. Mrs. Hampton chaperones the two of you to this tea house, and quite a few fashionable people there enjoying the tea and little cakes, nibbles, and of course everything, all the talk is about the ball this evening, and what an entertaining and wonderful season it has been, and how lucky that Brighton has been to have two definitely such eligible bachelors. And can you give me a listen roll, please?
I can indeed. Oh, no. 100 against 50. What a horrible, horrible thing to happen. It's my first proper roll of the scenario.
Well, hopefully that just means it's out of the way. Now, obviously that is a fumble.
Yes.
So you are just so distracted by, bless her, Harriet, wittering away about her lovely Lieutenant Wandsworth and how wonderful the militia are and how lucky Brighton is to have the militia stationed there, that you completely managed to miss everything else that's going on around you. But you do know an awful lot about Lieutenant Wandsworth and how wonderful he is, and how she hopes that you will be lucky as she has been to find someone as wonderful and charming and kind and considerate and handsome. And she just basically, this list of superlatives just keeps going. And Mrs. Hampton is not helping by just cooing over this all and basically mirroring these sentiments.
And I think Janitra is just sort of nodding and smiling, because it's so nice to see her so excited, and it's been such a lovely season as well. And even if it's starting to go in one ear and out the other, it's nice, isn't it? Just to be out having a nice cup of tea and a piece of cake by the seaside with a lovely ball to go to this evening where absolutely nothing terrifying will happen.
The only terrifying thing that's likely to happen is you getting the steps wrong to a dance.
The scandal, the horror.
Oh, exactly. might be an idea to avoid the first dance of the evening, because you know they're going to be doing a minuet, which is particularly tricky. What is your dancing skill?
Ooh, what is my dancing skill? It's 60. I have a dance of 60.
Obviously, you've been practicing a lot this season, but you're still not sure you're of quite the standard necessary for the minuet. Sets, the cotillion, various other things you're quite happy to try, but yes, you think you'll probably discreetly make polite conversation while the first dance is going on, and you will let the more energetic and more experienced dancers show people how it is done. Obviously, you haven't found a bow yet. You don't really want to embarrass yourself on this last evening.
So I think her plan will be to stand there looking very happy and like she doesn't want to take the spotlight. She just wants to let the men come to her, I think, is her plan, to stand there with a glass of punch and kind of clapping along and looking like she's having a lovely time, which I'm sure she will be.
That sounds like a very sensible plan. And if the men haven't got the taste to come and find you, well, that's their problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. She wouldn't want to dance with any man who wouldn't want to come and ask her.
Excellent, excellent. Well, in that case, once you've finished tea, you head back to the Hamptons house, which is in a fairly respectable part of Brighton, in Dorset Gardens. Reasonably fashionable, not embarrassing, shall we put it that way. And you spend the rest of the day preparing yourself, and your dress arrives, and Madame Gilbert has outdone herself. It's absolutely beautiful, tastefully ostentatious, with all the gold and trimmings, but not flashily so.
Mm-hmm. Just enough to sparkle in the candlelight, I think.
Exactly. And at the requisite time, the Hamptons carriage pulls up to the front door, and the three of you make your way in the carriage to the assembly rooms on Ship Street. It's busy, as you would expect. This is the last ball of the season. Everyone who is anyone and anyone who is everyone is there. They all want to be seen. So you have minor members of the aristocracy there, you have all of the gentry, all of the hangers-on. It's a beautiful venue. You go up the steps and enter the anteroom, which is absolutely packed, as you would expect on an evening like this evening. And standing there, not too far from the door, is a tall and stately-looking black man in black silk with an amazing scarlet waistcoat and neckerchief and a scarlet sash. Now, you know that this is Mr. Prothero, and he is the master of ceremonies. And as soon as you and Mr. and Mrs. Hampton arrive, he coughs. The chatter that's going on pauses briefly as he announces in a clear, sonorous voice, "Mr. and Mrs. Hampton and Miss Janitra Chatterjee." And then as soon as that's done, all the chattering starts again, and that's it. You know, you've been noticed, that's it. You're in. You look up slightly nervously at the imposing portrait of Dr. Russell that is staring down at you, and Dr. Russell was the physician who launched Brighton's fame and fortune in the first place. It's his fault that you're all here. And the place is sparkling. It's full of everyone. The energy is amazing. Are you looking for anyone in particular, or are you happy to be swept along by the crowds?
I think the first thing to do would be to go and greet the hostess and thank her for the invitation and thank her for hosting such a lovely party.
That is Lady Bagtonbury, who is the social doyenne of Brighton. She is the Duchess of Rochfield, so what I'm going to need from you is an etiquette roll to make sure that you approach her in the right manner.
Okay, I'm sure Janitra knows the proper form of address, but Lydia does not. So let's see. Oh no, not again. 91 over 60.
Oh dear. Now, do you want to push that roll? Bearing in mind that if you mess up, That is going to be a serious faux pas, which will cost you reputation.
Oh, she's very keen to not threaten her reputation. It's her thing. It's what she does. So, no, I think I will just stick with the failure and whatever horrible consequence it brings.
Okay, give me a reputation roll to see how badly you've messed up.
Okay, I have a reputation of 65. Another failure. 3 in a row. Oh dear.
The dice roller is definitely being temperamental this evening.
Doesn't like me, does it?
No, I mean, would you care to spend 9 points of luck to ameliorate that?
Do you know, I've got a lot of luck. I've got 70 points of luck, and I think that this is the big event of the season. This is the final ball. Yes, I think it's worth spending the luck.
Okay, so I'm going to say that basically you lose 1 point of reputation because you stutter, you slightly get the greeting incorrect. You also ignore her dog, Nero, which is the main reason you're losing the reputation point. Because as everybody knows, Lady Bagtonbury is never seen anywhere without her little dog, Nero. And you ignoring him is, oh dear. Your nerves and the excitement of this evening just obviously got to you slightly. So no massive harm done.
Great.
Your inexperience in social situations with members of the peerage obviously has just come through there.
At least I didn't trip over the dog or anything, so could have been worse, I guess.
Yes. It could have been a lot worse, yes. So you retreat, and just as you retreat, Harriet appears.
Harriet, my dear. She gives her a little air kiss on both cheeks.
Oh, Janitra, I say, I am sorry things didn't quite go well with her ladyship. Never mind. I mean, at least you're going back to London at the weekend. Oh, that's probably not the right thing to say, is it? But it's all right. I'm sure nobody noticed.
Well, let's just draw a line under it, shall we? And she starts fanning herself a little rapidly because she's maybe looking a bit pink now.
Yes, that's, have you, look, Captain King, Captain King's over there. You'll never guess who he's talking to.
Who?
That's Eleanor's brother. That's the Reverend Henry Mortimer.
Oh, Reverend Mortimer.
He's quite a handsome young man. Both of them are, to be honest. That's an interesting one. If he's here, that means Eleanor must be here somewhere. But you can't actually see her at this particular point in time.
Well, perhaps she's in the powder room or getting a glass of punch.
And as you're sort of looking around for and thinking that, you hear Mrs. Hampton. Oh, that's the Reverend Mortimer, is it? Oh, I did wonder if he would be here this evening. I mean, of course, you know he was widowed 9 months ago, don't you, my dear? It is slightly odd that he's back in society less than a year since the death of his wife. I mean, they were the jewel of the ton. And, you know, I do believe it is said that it was a love match, of all things. A very rare occurrence, like myself and Mr. Hampton, obviously. Not that you can see Mr. Hampton. Mr. Hampton basically disappeared off to play cards the moment you were through the door. But it is interesting that he's here this evening. I can't imagine why a widower would want to be at a society ball. Most interesting. It's an interesting family, the Mortimers, yes. Osney Grange, in Hampshire, I believe. Yes. Can you give me an etiquette roll, please?
I can indeed. Let's hope this one goes better than the last one. The curse has been broken. 60 against 60.
That's a regular success.
It is.
Yes, as Mrs. Hampton is chatting about Reverend Mortimer being a widower, she's correct, actually. It is very odd that he's out in society again less than a year since his wife's death. 12 months is the acceptable period of mourning for a spouse, and with him being a vicar, with obviously a certain degree more social responsibility than most people, you'd have expected him to maintain that. So it is interesting that he's here.
I think Janitra would probably assume, because she has quite a generous heart, I think she'd probably assume that he is just really trying to forget about it and trying to move on with his life, but maybe not realizing that this is going to cause a little bit of scandal. So she's kind of worried for him, really.
Aww. And that just says what a wonderful young woman that she is. Now, as Mrs. Hampton is chatting this, and you're having a think about it and feeling quite sorry, really, for the Reverend, you spot Eleanor weaving her way through the crowd. Like you said, it's rather busy. You can see through to the ballroom, you can see various people are dancing. You actually spot Sir Jasper, and he seems to be dancing with another young woman that you've seen at these occasions, a Miss Marina Garrick. Now, you know that she's a rather wild young woman, and Eleanor is positively buzzing. As much as Eleanor buzzes, Eleanor is a very serious and sensible young woman, very practical, quite quiet, quite reserved. She's the exact opposite, really, of Harriet. So when she arrives, she points out Sir Jasper dancing with Miss Garrick, and says, I don't suppose you've heard, Sir Jasper's just invited Miss Garrick to his ball this weekend.
My word! How very forward.
I know.
Exciting, though. Well, sort of, isn't it?
I mean, it is. I mean, and she sort of looks to make sure Harriet isn't listening. Like, I mean, he's a bit of a rake.
Yes, I heard. A libertine, Harriet said.
Exactly. I think you may have had a narrow escape there, my dear.
Well, I intend to marry somebody very sensible and very rich and very nice who will let me do as I like.
Oh, that sounds like an admirable prospect, my dear. Obviously, I have no interest myself. I haven't yet met the man who would encourage me to consider walking down the aisle. And I don't think I could ever be as happy as dear Henry was with Charlotte. And you see her give a pitying look in the direction of her brother, who is still talking to the dashing Captain King. And you notice he looks up and he catches her eye, and you see her beckon him with her fan. So over comes the dashing-looking Reverend Mortimer. So you see a dark-haired gentleman wearing a white neckerchief and well-tailored black clothing, perfectly respectable and suitable for a vicar. And he walks towards you. He smiles at Eleanor. She turns to you and says, "My dear Miss Chatterjee, may I introduce you to my brother, the Reverend Henry Mortimer? Henry, this is my good friend, Miss Chatterjee."
And Janitra smiles and gives a slight curtsy to the socially appropriate depth, given his station in life, and says, "Reverend Mortimer, it's wonderful to meet you. I've heard so much about you."
Give me a psychology roll.
Okay. Another failure, 32 against 25.
I love this dice roller. It is such a drama queen. It's wonderful.
It really is. It really is.
Now, I wouldn't recommend spending luck on this. You see an expression pass across his face, but you can't quite decipher it. You shrug. You let it go. The gentleman is in mourning. This is probably his first outing into society, really, since his wife's death. Yes, it's entirely possible. It is a bit overwhelming, so he's slightly off balance. But he seems to rally himself very quickly, and then asks you, "Miss Chatterjee, it is my pleasure. I don't suppose you would care to dance, would you?"
"I would be honoured, Reverend Mortimer."
You can see Eleanor smiling, and the Reverend leads you through to the ballroom, and you take your place for a cotillion. Let's see what the dice roller thinks. The music starts.
Oh dear.
You take your positions. And give me a dancing roll, please.
Come on, dice. 89 against 60. Oh, why? Why does the dice roller hate Miss Janitra Chatterjee so much? She's nice. She's lovely.
Well, again, you have an option of pushing that roll by concentrating furiously on your dance steps and not talking, or you can talk to the Reverend and just make a bit of a hash of things.
I think in this instance, where she's really just dancing with him because it would be horribly rude to refuse, and he's clearly, his heart's not in it either. So I think she's not going to kind of really try her hardest to be getting him in conversation, because he's clearly not, he's just not that into her. So she's just going to smile and just dance without trying to make too much of a thing out of it. So no, not going to push this one.
Right. So we have a lovely table of things that you can have done wrong here for dancing, which is wonderful. Oh, well, you're definitely in the appropriate attire. So, do you feel that basically because she's just being polite and sort of slightly embarrassed about this, do you feel that Miss Chatterjee is probably sort of dancing to a different dance, or messing her steps up slightly, still possibly slightly embarrassed by her presentation to Lady Bagtonbury this evening?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter. She's maybe a little bit behind the beat. Maybe she's just not kind of quite as vivacious as she's supposed to be. She's maybe shuffling a little bit. Maybe at one point the train of her dress gets caught in the heel of her slipper. She's just not at her most elegant, I think.
Roll me 1d4, see how bad your reputation loss is for making a mess here.
This is like a war of attrition, isn't it? 1.
You're obviously not your most delicate and dainty this evening, and yes, you get your dress caught, you hear a slight tearing sound. You also bump into the Reverend, who is very, very kind about it. And as you bump into him, he's smiling. He seems to be enjoying himself quite a lot more than you would have expected, to be honest. Now, you don't think this is at your discomfort and your embarrassment. It does seem slightly odd. Do we put it that way?
I think she takes it with good grace. She just kind of hopes that he is having a good time, and that even though he's clearly still mourning, that he gets something nice out of the evening. And so she's not that worried about her dress being caught or not doing too well on the dance floor tonight. There's plenty more fish in the sea.
When the dance ends, he actually is very gracious. He apologises for giving you the wrong direction and making you stumble over your steps, and thanks you for being a most obliging dance partner, and also asks if you would care to dance with him again later in the evening.
Oh, Reverend, thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine. I would be glad to see you again later.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Chatterjee. If you'll excuse me, I must find my sister for the moment. Just need to make sure that she's all right. I don't suppose you've seen where she is, have you?
Not since before we started dancing, and I think she'll look around and just see if she can see her at all.
Well, if you'll permit me to escort you back to your hosts, the Hamptons. I can see Mrs. Hampton. I obviously wouldn't want to leave you alone without an escort in here. If you will permit me, madam. Miss Chatterjee.
Thank you, sir. She puts her hand on his arm.
Very graciously leads you back through the room. Can you give me another psychology roll, please?
Okay. I am cursed. 30 against 25.
You're obviously still distracted by this whole Lady Bagtonbury not quite getting your dance steps correct. Yes, you're just presumably quite grateful that he's been very understanding about it and hasn't just run off at the first opportunity and is behaving actually like a perfect gentleman, which really isn't surprising given your experience of Eleanor. You know, she's obviously been very respectably brought up and has excellent manners. So once you have been delivered to Mrs. Hampton, Reverend Mortimer wishes you a good evening and politely reminds you that you have agreed to dance with him again later in the evening.
Is there a lady's maid available? I think I might have caught the hem of my dress. I could do with somebody just putting a couple of stitches in quickly. Perhaps Eleanor knows where I might find somebody to help me?
Oh, my dear, yes. I do believe she's chatting to Harriet. They did disappear off in the direction of the powder room. You might find them there.
Ah, that's exactly what I need. I'm sure there'll be a maid there. I won't be long. Please do excuse me.
Of course, my dear. I'm going to go and find where Mr. Hampton is. I'm sure he's enjoying himself, but we don't want him spending all evening in the card room, now do we?
Oh, of course not. I'll see you shortly. Please excuse me.
Of course, my dear. Off you go, off you go.
And she heads off to the powder room in search of both Harriet and Eleanor and a lady's maid with a needle.
Which you find. Eleanor and Harriet are in there, chattering away, straightening their attire, powdering themselves. It is very warm in here, obviously, because there's an awful lot of people, and everybody seems to have been dancing. Oh, Janitra, how did the dance go? How did the dance go?
I've done better, I think, but never mind. The evening is still young.
Oh, it is. So many eligible men to dance with. Oh, I'm very sorry about Sir Jasper. I'm to be honest, I'm sure that Miss Garrick's far more his speed than you. Like you said, I mean, he is my cousin, and one doesn't want to speak ill of one's family, but yes, I'm sure they're perfectly suited to each other.
Well, how do her parents feel about it? I mean, if he's a libertine, if he's something of a rake, then shouldn't they be warned?
Oh, quite probably. But I have heard that they've pretty much given up on her, to be honest. She's rather wild and rather headstrong. I think they might just be quite glad to get her married off to anybody who'll take her, to be fair.
Well, I just hope she knows what she's doing, and she kind of mentally files this information away for later because matchmaking is her passion, and she wouldn't want to see any young lady lose her reputation, even if there is somebody very exciting involved.
Eleanor, in the meantime, is organising the maid to help fix your dress. Thankfully, the damage is minor and it can be easily repaired. You were very lucky. Basically, it could have been a lot worse.
That is good to know.
Now, are you telling Eleanor that her brother is looking for her?
Yes, I think so.
So Eleanor makes her goodbyes and heads off. And as soon as he's gone, Harriet sort of you can see her face light up. She's really excited. Did you like the Reverend? Was he very charming?
He seems like a very pleasant gentleman.
Oh, I'm so pleased. It's such a terrible loss. It was so romantic. You know the story about his marriage to his late wife, yes?
Well, I did hear it was a love match. How very sad for him to have lost her.
Oh, it was. It was such a love match. Yes, and tragic loss. I mean, Eleanor doesn't speak about it much, as you know. They were truly in love, and it was a whirlwind romance, you know. And it's so exciting. My relationship with the lieutenant isn't quite whirlwind, but it's very romantic. And to find your true match and to be whisked off your feet. And I know it was slightly risque, the speed with which they got engaged and got married, but it was just so romantic. Oh,
what happened? Tell me about it.
Oh, well, you see, she's the niece of Squire Goodwin of Osney Grange. You've probably not heard of it. It's a relatively minor estate in Hampshire, but her father was rather wealthy, and she used to spend quite a lot of time at her uncle's, and Mr. Mortimer, the Reverend Mortimer, he spent quite a lot of time there. He's local to Osney Grange, and they met at a ball, and there was dancing and music, and and he swept her off her feet, and they had a bit of a reputation for sneaking off together when they really shouldn't, without a chaperone, which is quite remarkable for a man of the cloth. Not a boring, stale fuddy-duddy like our vicar. And but everyone could see how much in love they were. So when she took ill, oh dear, it was heartbreaking. And the poor man, he tried everything to find a cure, but she died suddenly. And the poor man. And you can see Harriet's actually starting to tear up as she's telling you this.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know.
Poor man. And so unexpected. Was her illness quite a short one?
Oh, yes. I believe she may have been ill for longer than they thought. Hindsight is such a, not wonderful thing in this situation, is it? But you know what I mean. But yes, it all happened very, very suddenly.
Well, I suppose he can take some comfort in knowing how much he was loved, at least.
Oh, yes.
But that is such tragedy.
It is, isn't it? And you can see that she's swept away by this whole romantic fantasy thing.
I think she hands Harriet a very pretty lace-aged handkerchief because she can see the little tears coming in her eyes, and she doesn't want to end up with bags under her eyes when she's trying to seduce a bunch of very eligible bachelors in a very appropriate fashion, of course.
And Harriet takes your handkerchief and very, very delicately dabs beneath her eyes and then hands it back to you.
But how curious that he's at a ball so soon after his wife's death. It's not really the done thing, is it? Especially not for a man quite so clearly swept away by passion as he was.
I know. It's a bit perplexing, isn't it? Well, interesting too. I don't know. Yes, one would have thought that he'd have locked himself away in his vicarage and pined away, composing love poems to his dear departed wife, but perhaps he's more of a sensible nature too, like Eleanor, or maybe it's Eleanor that's encouraged him to come out. I mean, it can't do anybody any good locked away in a vicarage in the middle of Hampshire.
Absolutely. And does he have his eye on anybody?
Well, not that I've heard, no. I mean, unless you're interested.
Well, he seems very pleasant, but I didn't really feel much of a spark.
Oh.
But he did ask to dance with me again later this evening.
Oh, well, there you go. It's hardly surprising there's not a spark. The man is less than a year widowed. I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't just be being polite about it.
Well, he does sound as though he deserves some happiness.
Oh, yes, I think you're right. And so does Eleanor. I mean, it must be such a worry. She's very devoted to him.
Yes, and Eleanor seems a very, very pleasant lady as well. She'd be an ideal sister-in-law, now I come to think of it.
Oh, she would. She's so sensible and practical.
Do you know, I think I'd like to get to know him a little bit better.
Oh, wonderful. And I mean, even if nothing comes of it, at least you'll have had a pleasant evening dancing with, I suppose, technically an eligible bachelor.
This is very true. Perhaps he just needs a nice evening,
Exactly. It doesn't have to be anything more than that, does it?
Well, we shall see what we shall see.
Exactly. Oh, speaking of which, I'm sure it must be supper time soon. Shall we go and get some punch?
Oh, yes, let's.
And she grabs your hand and practically drags you out of the powder room. Is there anything that Lydia would like to do? now that you have escaped the powder room.
I think Punch sounds like a great idea, but also I think she's just kind of looking around and seeing who else is there, if there's anybody else catching her eye, and if there's anybody looking at her.
No, unfortunately. Instead, Captain King seems to be spending all of his time with Miss Garrick, to the point that people are actually starting to talk about the fact that he's pretty much doing every dances with her. Sir Jasper seems to be making the rounds. He whisks Harriet away for a dance. She giggles quite a lot. He doesn't seem to be particularly enjoying it. He just seems to be going through the motions, to be quite honest. But you do see him spending time with Miss Dilwyn and various other women. But, if you were forced to make a decision, you'd say that, yes, he probably was spending more time with the young Welsh lady. Reverend Mortimer dances with one or two other women, but mostly seems to be dancing with his sister, which seems appropriate. You see Mrs. Hampton chatting to some of her older friends. Mr. Hampton, as far as you can tell, is still firmly lodged in the card room. And as the evening comes on, the Reverend Mortimer approaches you again for another dance.
And Janitra smiles at him. She's feeling a bit better disposed to him now. She's heard about this tragic lost love of his, and she's beginning to think that maybe what he needs is to fall in love again.
That sounds like an interesting idea. So he's basically a project for you, you think?
Absolutely, yes. It's so sad about his wife, a love match, which is very rare, of course, and so happy together, and then such a terrible tragedy for her to have died, and him trying to find a cure and nothing, and it really tugs at her heartstrings. And she's a firm believer that love and friendship and companionship are the most important things in the world. So she's really quite glad that he's put himself out there again, even so soon after his wife's death, and she thinks, well, maybe she's the girl who can help him get over this horrible, horrible loss.
He seems to almost sense that there's been a change in your attitude towards him. He's still just as polite and attentive and kindly towards you, but you can see he's a lot less stiff and formal than he was as he leads you out onto the dance floor. And this is the final dance of the evening, actually. So, people are taking notice that you're the one he's asked for it. So can you give me another dance roll, please? And let's see if you've managed to regain your composure.
Fingers crossed. Let's see. Come on, dance skill. Yes, a regular success of 34 against 60.
Yes, you obviously have. Now you have made your mind up that he is going to be your project. Mm-hmm. You have a renewed sense of purpose, and you dance beautifully. He seems slightly surprised. Obviously, after your previous outing, he wasn't expecting you to be quite so nimble on your feet. So you're dancing away quite happily. Is there anything in particular you'd like to chat to him about? The dance that you're doing, you're sort of moving around partners and what have you. So you can at least chat to him, not an intense conversation that you'd have with something like a minuet, but you can certainly get bits of conversation in with him while you're dancing.
Reverend Mortimer, how well have you found Brighton this season? How have you occupied yourself?
Oh, well, I only came down this morning at Eleanor's insistence. She's had such a wonderful time here this season. She really wanted me to come down and meet you and meet Miss Fenchurch and just get a little time away from the vicarage and enjoy some sea air. I'm afraid I have to head back tomorrow, but do you know, I think she was right. I think this has done me the power of good to change of scenery.
Absolutely. It's so wonderful to be out in the world, isn't it? And the sea air is so invigorating, and it's so wonderful to spend time with people as well, isn't it? I hope you don't mind me saying, but it must be a very isolated life back in Hampshire, in a vicarage. I do hope you have some society and some good friends around you to help occupy you.
Well, there's Charlotte's uncle. Charlotte was my wife, as I'm sure Eleanor must have told you. There's Charlotte's uncle, Squire Godwin. He's somewhat taken Eleanor and myself under his wing since my dear Charlotte's death. Rather elderly gentleman, rather old-fashioned, but, his heart's in the right place, even if he is an old fuss budget. And then there's Dr. Beamish, quite a flamboyant chap. Used to be a physician in London before he decided to retire to the country. But other than that, no, there's not a great deal of society in Osney Grange. The village itself is rather small, very agricultural. You must forgive me if I stumble over my words a little, Miss Chatterjee. I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice. But your smile and your consideration have been a tonic this evening. I must thank you.
Well, I am very, very glad to have danced with you, and I would appreciate it very much if you would like to call. Perhaps to call on my family estate if you find yourself in the area at all. And maybe next season I'll see you as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, perhaps next season, yes. Can you give me a psychology roll, please?
I can indeed. What is up with him? Unexpectedly a failure of 71 against 25.
You can only assume that it's guilt. Obviously, you're talking about going out and enjoying yourself and, visiting families and going out and doing the social rounds. There's just this moment's hesitation as he's dancing, and you just think that perhaps it's just dawned on him what he's doing, and being out and about is perhaps not quite what he should be doing. You're assuming that's it anyway, but it passes very, very quickly.
And her heart goes out to him even more. I think she's absolutely convinced that he just needs the love of a good woman to get over this terrible, terrible loss, and she is intending to be that woman.
So not just matchmaking then?
Yes, I think so.
Nothing to do with the mention of his fortune, I take it.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. Or this Squire Godwin and all the cream of Hampshire society, I'm sure that he must have a link to as well.
Yes, connections.
Nothing to do with that at all.
The dance comes to an end. He bows to you. He takes you back to Mrs. Hampton, who is very over-solicitous towards him and just chatters away. I mean, it's endearing, but it is still slightly embarrassing. She has no children. Like you said, she has been rather over-solicitous and you can see the poor gentleman is getting embarrassed. He looks positively relieved when Eleanor appears and insists that they should leave, seeing as he has an early start in the morning to head back to Hampshire.
Oh, it is such a shame that you'll be leaving in the morning.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have sermon to prepare for Sunday, but I do hope to see you again soon, Miss Chatterjee. It's been a most entertaining evening. I thank you again.
It's been my very great pleasure, Reverend, and I look forwards to our next meeting. And she gives him a big smile and curtsies.
And he takes your hand and brings it up towards his lips and bows towards it, but does not kiss it.
That would be far too intimate at this juncture.
Exactly. So, and you hear Mrs. Hampton giggle, actually, behind her fan. You hear this little... she's obviously quite taken. And Eleanor smiles and nods at you as she and the Reverend Mortimer leave. There's no sign of Harriet. She's disappeared. And the guests start to file away. Mr. Hampton appears from the card room, actually chatting to Captain King. And he wanders over to you. Oh, yes, pleasant evening, ladies.
Oh, very much so. Did you have a pleasant evening? How were the cards?
Yes. Oh, the fish were biting tonight, my dear.
Oh, that's good to hear. Your luck was in, then.
Oh, definitely, definitely, definitely. Good sort, that king. Full of ideas. Possibly a little progressive for the likes of me, but good loser. Didn't mind an old man taking all his fish.
Well, I think we've both had a profitable evening then.
Oh, didn't tread on anyone's toes then, my dear.
Only my own.
Good, good. Wouldn't want you making a fool of yourself at the last night of the season, would we?
Oh no, that would be terrible, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes, yes.
And she just kind of tries to blank out the memory of insulting the dog. It's just the worst thing she's ever done in her life, ever.
He hooks his arm through yours, pats you on the arms. Come on then, it's time to go home. Must get your beauty sleep. I'm reliably informed by my good wife.
And off she goes.
And it has been quite an exciting evening. I mean, how do you feel about it being the end of the season?
Well, there's it's a bit bittersweet, really, isn't it? Because it's been a lovely summer and it's always nice to be out by the seaside, and it's lovely to be having social whirl and to be full of friends and family, and then kind of back to just the normal reality of life until next year. It's a bit sad, but she's got good memories, and now she's potentially got Reverend Mortimer, and she starts thinking about, maybe Christmas, maybe New Year, perhaps I'll see him over the winter. Something to occupy myself with over the cold, dark months is to plot. How's she going to reel him in? But really she's thinking of him. She just wants him to be happy. She wants him to find a new life, I think.
Excellent. So you sleep with dreams of ballrooms and dancing and Reverend Mortimer and your friends and all the exciting things that you've done this season. And you wake the next morning slightly sad, but you as you say, you've had a very entertaining time of it, and your brain is full of plans for how you can get to see the Reverend and Eleanor and your friends again. And as you're breakfasting, there's a knock at the door. One of the servants then comes back a few moments later with a letter for you.
A letter? That's intriguing.
A letter for you, yes.
Oh, there it is.
Would you care to read the letter out for us, please?
I would indeed. It says, "My dear friend, we have now fully made up our mind to leave Brighton for a time, as circumstances have occurred which tender it necessary for Henry to return to Osney Grange. Will you favour us with your company at the vicarage for a spell? I'm heading down this Friday, and I should be delighted by your presence. Henry has also expressed his fondest desires that you will join us. We will take no denial. There are lovely walks round our village. It is a very pleasant change from Brighton, for after having been some time in town, one really longs for country air. Several very old friends of ours reside in the neighbourhood, which will, I hope, make your visit pleasant. Yours very affectionately, Eleanor."
So yes, I mean, this is a very pleasant surprise.
It is. It's as though everything is aligning. Something new to do, somewhere new to go, new friends, and in a vicarage. The vicarage.
Now, Mr. and Mrs. Hampton obviously there at you with breakfast. Mrs. Hampton is reading the morning papers. Are you showing or mentioning your invitation to them?
Absolutely, yes. I think she'd be very excited at this juncture, and she'll pass it over to both the ladies first and say, there's one door closes on the season, another door opens. Look, I've had an invitation.
Oh, my dear, that's marvellous, marvellous. I'm sure Eleanor would be most grateful of your company. You did seem to get on so well.
She seemed very nice. I must write a letter to my parents before I leave here, just to tell them where I'll be going.
Yes, of course, of course. And Mr. Hampton at this point looks up from the letter that he's been reading. He said, Oh, well, that's rather fortunate, my dear. I'm glad to hear you're going to have something to do. King's just invited me and my good lady here to his place in London for a soiree this weekend. Didn't mention you. A bit strange. So I suppose actually it's all worked out for the best, really.
Oh, how wonderful. I think country air is just what I need right now.
Good, good, good. Glad to find you see that you've been making friends, my dear. Excellent, excellent news. Anything interesting in that paper, my dear? What's the local rag got to say about the last night of the ball? And Mrs. Hampton sort of smiles at him. There's a small part about your reverend here, Janitra dear.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What does it say?
Preparations for the approaching Grand Musical Festival at Winchester in Hampshire are on a most extensive scale, and all the first-rate singers are engaged to celebrate the opening of a magnificent organ presented by the Reverend H. Mortimer in memoriam of his recently departed wife. It is noted that Reverend Mortimer's mourning was considerably shorter than is customary for a loss of this magnitude. The writer asks whether the good Reverend knows of any impediment why he should not observe the proper period, or whether he was mourning at all. I say, that seems rather strong stuff.
That's rather cruel, actually. I think it's a lovely idea that his wife will live on through music. I mean, I'm not terribly talented myself. I play a little pianoforte, but if it was a passion of hers, then I think that's lovely.
You are such a good heart, my dear. You really do have such a good heart. But of course you will be careful, won't you? Your reputation is a fragile thing, you know.
Absolutely. I'm sure Eleanor will be the perfect chaperone. I would never allow myself to be compromised in any way.
I know you wouldn't, my dear. You are a very sensible child.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here in your home. It's been such a lovely summer.
It has, hasn't it? You've been an absolutely marvellous house guest, and I'm pleased you're going to go on and spend some time with your friends. Oh, so many things to do, I suppose. Well, we'll be packing for London, and of course you'll be packing for Hampshire, and I suppose you've got everything that you'll need for a visit to the country, won't you? Have you, my dear?
Well, I suppose I could do with a new hat.
Oh, well, the milliners, yes. Oh, I'm sure that would be an excellent place for you to visit, my dear. He does the most wonderful work. Mr. Brand, yes, Mr. Brand. I'm sure you'll be able to find something suitable to take to the country with you there.
Absolutely.
He's never let us down before.
Yes, I fear that the sea air has rather played havoc with some of my bonnets.
Yes, you must treat yourself. Of course you must, my dear.
Thank you. Yes, I shall go there after breakfast.
Excellent. Normally for a lady of your station, I would say that perhaps a country vicar is beneath you. But obviously there is his fortune to consider. I mean, technically it was his wife's fortune, but it's his now. And, a vicar with ambitions.
Yes.
I could just see you as a bishop's wife, obviously with Winchester.
Oh, yes.
Just being a short distance from their estate. Well, from his uncle's estate.
Well.
Uncle-in-law's estate. It's all very complicated, isn't it?
Why stop at bishop? Archbishop of Canterbury. I think he's clearly a man with such great passion inside him. Perhaps he has ambitions as well. We shall see.
Yes.
Perhaps just the right words in the right ear, the right connections, and of course a loyal wife to keep a wonderful home for him and run a good staff of servants but I'm getting ahead of myself now.
She reaches across the table and pats your hands. Nothing wrong with having plans, my dear. Just be careful of your reputation.
I will. You have no worries on that score.
I may send one of the servants out with you to go to the milliners. Obviously, I have rather a lot to do. I need to go through my wardrobe and see what we have for this soiree in London that Mr. Hampton's got us invited to. Will you be all right on your own, my dear?
Oh, of course. Or perhaps I could take Harriet with me.
Yes, that's an excellent idea. Why don't you write to your parents to let them know what's happening, and then we can send the boy round to Miss Fenchurch's and see if she's available.
Absolutely. And she finishes her cup of tea and rises from the table and goes off to her writing desk to pen a short letter.
And what exactly is she telling her parents?
She's going to say what a lovely time she's had and how the last evening went so well, and that she's made a new friend, Miss Eleanor. She's probably not actually going to mention the Reverend Mortimer because they might get a little bit concerned that this is moving far too quickly before they've even had a chance to check him out or meet him or anything. So she's just going to mention that Eleanor has invited her to the country for a few days from the weekend, that she'll be heading down on Friday.
Excellent.
And she signs it with a very fond sign-off and says she will see them again soon.
Excellent. And by the time you finished writing that, you've heard a knock at the door. You've heard Harriet getting very excited downstairs, the fact that she's been summoned to go hat shopping.
She's adorable. I love Harriet.
And you head off towards the milliners on New Street. Now, Mr. Brand has a large range of hats, probably the largest this side of the Thames, and it is well known that the Prince Regent's mistress, Mrs. Fitzherbert, shops here. So, naturally, so does the rest of the ton.
How very pleasantly scandalous. Patronised by a royal mistress. That's very modern, she thinks.
You might otherwise not go there, but to be quite honest, he does have by far the best hats. Where Madame Gilbert is perfect for outfits and accessories, she's not a milliner.
Okay. Oh, good morning, Mr. Brand.
Good morning, my dear. Yes, what can I do for you today?
Well, I find myself in need of something suitable for country wear, something for taking country walks in. I was saying to my dear Mrs. Hampton that I'm afraid the salt air has rather marked up some of the silk lining with some of my bonnets. So, yes, I think 2 or 3 country hats, please, is what I'm looking for. What can you recommend?
Let's have a look at the range, shall we, my dear? And he guides you very respectfully towards the various hats that he has. He's showing you these various sort of velvet bonnets and things, and with lovely ribbons on them, making sure that they don't blow off in the wind and what have you. So you can take nice bracing walks in the countryside. And despite the fact the season's over, there's obviously quite a lot of people in here chattering away.
Do I recognise any of them?
There's a few of the people that you've seen all season at various balls, sort of hanging around, chatting, gossiping actually about what happened at last night's ball.
Do I hear the Reverend Mortimer's name being mentioned at all?
Give me a listen roll, please.
Okay. Yeah, this is definitely a curse, isn't it? 59 against 50.
You do hear it mentioned, but it's all sort of, a lot of it is pretty much actually what you heard last night from various people. You already know that he married well, and that his wife, Charlotte, was a wealthy woman. She was left her father's estate. Somehow it wasn't entailed away to a male relative, so it was left in trust for her, and since her death, that's now passed to her husband. You know that they were a love match and that it was possibly a little bit of a scandalous relationship. The fact that they got married at the end of it redeemed them in society's eyes, very much so. But one of the things that you do hear that you weren't so sure of is that no one seems to be quite sure what she actually died of. There's various rumours, but as you're moving around, paying attention to Mr. Brand with one ear and trying to listen to what people are saying with the other one. So obviously you're kind of missing bits as you're making the correct noises to Mr. Brand as he's showing you the hats. So you miss most of the theories. You do hear commiseration about Eleanor's status, that her devotion to her brother is probably going to mean that she'll die an old maid.
Not if Janitra has anything to do with it. That will be her project after this one. Soon as she's got a ring on her finger, she's going to start looking for somebody nice for Eleanor.
You have a very pleasant conversation with Mr. Brand. You pick out 2 hats that you think will serve you well. I mean, you are, as far as you know, only going for the weekend, you don't really want to overdo it. But you have two very, very beautiful bonnets that will work nicely and coordinate with your wardrobe.
Nice. Yeah, I think she's bought one for if it's warm and one for if it's a bit wet and windy.
And one never can tell with Hampshire, so that's very, very wise.
You never can. Never can.
Is there anything else that Miss Chatterjee would like to do for the rest of the day?
Well, I think it's a fairly long carriage ride, so she might just pass through the bookshop at some point just to pick up something to read on the journey.
Yes, and of course there is the excellent Messrs Hawkwood and Shaw on North Street, the bookbinders and reading rooms. You know that the Hamptons have a subscription to the reading room. So, you've spent a few happy hours there picking out things, reading things to make sure they're quite to your taste. So, yes, you know exactly where to go. Harriet rolls her eyes when you mention going to the bookshop. She was quite enjoying herself looking around the hats and fripperies. She's really not quite so interested in the books, but, under sufferance, obviously, because she can't really let you go on your own. She joins you.
Well, maybe we can find a romance novel for you.
Oh, something slightly risque, something gothic.
Something with pirates in it.
Oh, pirates. That's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
She perks up quite a lot at the mention of pirates and romance.
So, yeah, I think she'll buy whatever is the Regency equivalent of a slightly tame bodice ripper, because you can't have anything too scandalous, but it does have a pirate in it and a romance for Harriet, but nothing that would shock the parents too much.
Well, thankfully, because Mr. Hawkeswood, you haven't met Mr. Shaw. He's usually somewhere in the back room cataloguing the rare books. But Mr. Hawkeswood is very gentlemanly, very kindly. So he helps you pick out a suitably entertaining but not scandalous book for Harriet. And also, he's got to know your tastes over the season, so he points you in the right direction of something that would keep you entertained on a carriage ride. But as he points out, it's not worth you buying too much, because if you're going to a vicarage, you would hope that the vicar would have a library.
Absolutely.
Although he does suggest that maybe you take 2 books with you, just in case it's of a learned nature and rather dry.
Yes, I think she'll buy whatever is the fashionable novel of the season.
You certainly can do that. And he parcels them all up very neatly for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to do while you're at the reading room?
Do they have newspapers? A kind of an archive of newspapers?
They do indeed, yes.
I think she's really curious now about this mysterious illness and how nobody seemed to know what happened and why. So I think she's going to try and look for Charlotte Mortimer's obituary.
Right. Give me a library use roll then, please.
Okay. She doesn't have great library use, just 20. No, that's a failure of 83 against 20. Probably not a surprising failure.
No. Basically, Harriet goes and sits down in one of the chairs in the reading room and unwraps her book and starts reading it immediately. Mr. Hawkeswood watches you going through the newspaper archive, and he can see that you're struggling, and it's taking you forever, and he can see the look of concentration on your face. So he wanders over and basically asks if he can be of assistance.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Yes, I'm looking for something about the late Mrs. Mortimer. It's such a shame about the Reverend Mortimer, don't you think? So very sad.
I don't think I know the gentleman particularly. Is that Miss Eleanor Mortimer's brother?
Yes, that's right. I'll be paying a short visit to them, and I just wanted to make sure that I knew the background, because the poor man is clearly grieving, and I just wouldn't want to say anything that would set him off or upset him. You know how it is.
I do. I do. I don't suppose you know when she died?
Well, it was less than a year ago.
Well, that narrows it down slightly, so we will need to look. If it's less than a year, we don't want to go back any further than last September. So if we start looking at these, and he's chatting away to himself as he starts to get sheafs of newspapers out of their storage, it takes you a few hours because you don't really know when exactly she died. But eventually, with Mr. Hawkswood's help, he finds a public notice in the Morning Post that announces Charlotte Mortimer's death after a sudden illness, dated the 1st of December 1811. Now, the other interesting note in the announcement is that it requests no mourners.
That's very unusual.
It is. It is.
And it says it was a sudden illness?
Yes. It doesn't go into details.
It's intriguing. I don't know quite what to make of that, neither does Janitra. The mystery is thickening, isn't it? Why wouldn't he want mourners, especially given that he's the vicar and he must have a whole congregation around him and that he must be doing funerals all the time? And even if he is quite a private man, you would expect that he'd do what is expected of him as a local vicar and a pillar of the community, and that he would just go through the motions of the ceremonies. She's slightly concerned at this. But, maybe he was just overtaken by grief. Maybe he just wasn't thinking straight. Poor man. Poor, dear man.
Yes, I mean, that's the only thing that you can honestly think of for that. If, as everyone has told you, as you've heard, that this was a match made in heaven, that they were greatly in love, then perhaps he just couldn't face sharing his grief with anyone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Or, well, and similar sort of thing really is the fact that he couldn't be sure of himself in front of a congregation to maintain the proper decorum.
Absolutely. I mean, the last thing he'd want to do is not embarrass himself exactly, but not give the right send-off to his wife, to not be able to go through with the ceremony as it's supposed to be done.
Exactly.
Poor man. But it's still very strange, isn't it? Well, maybe she'll find out more when she gets to Hampshire.
Right. You spend a very long time in there with Mr. Hawkswood's help trying to find something about Charlotte Mortimer's death, to the point that when you come back to find Harriet, she's effectively fallen asleep in one of the chairs with the book on her lap. Do you wish to make amends by taking her out for tea before you go back to the Hamptons to make your final travel arrangements?
Yes, I think so, because she also wants to pick up a box of chocolates as a goodbye present, just to say thank you to her hosts.
Excellent decision. So yes, you go back to the little tea shop that you were at on the Stane yesterday, and you make amends by buying some very nice cakes to cheer Harriet up. She seems sad that she's not going to see you this weekend. She chats about the fact that she's going to her cousin's ball at Thornhill Manor, and she gets more and more excited as she's chatting about it, because she's going to see her beau, and she wishes you all the best for your weekend, and hopes basically that it won't be too dull in the country.
Oh, I'm sure I shall find something to occupy myself with, my dear.
Oh, I do hope so. I suppose you can always go for romantic walks in the woodland, and do you have some watercolours? Do you have any painting materials? I'm sure you could paint some marvellous landscapes.
Well, I could try. Janitra knows her skills. She knows herself quite well. She's quite self-aware, and she knows that painting is not among them. She can barely manage splodgy stick figures, but she tries, bless her. She will never be what is termed an accomplished woman, I don't think.
But let's just say that her accomplishments lie in a different direction.
Yeah, she just leans into what she's good at, and what she's good at is people.
So you finish up your tea, you head to the chocolatier, you buy some very nice chocolates. You know that they're actually Mr. Hampton's favourites. He has quite a sweet tooth. And you get some little bonbons that you know that Mrs. Hampton is fond of as well. And they're all beautifully gift wrapped for you to take back to your hosts as a thank you gift. And I'm presuming you're spending the rest of the afternoon and the evening sort of getting yourself packed, and there's a note waiting for you when you get back that basically says that Eleanor will call on you with her carriage tomorrow lunchtime.
Okay.
Noon.
Great.
Take you into Hampshire.
Yes, she just packs and packs herself maybe a little day pack with a notebook and pencil and the books that she's just bought as well to take into the carriage with her. Just has a nice, restful afternoon. Maybe takes another little walk down to the seaside just to get a last few breaths of sea air in. But the air in the countryside will be nice as well.
Well, certainly Eleanor seems to think that it will make a refreshing change. It's chaos at the house, basically, because Mrs. Hampton's got everything out because she's packing to go to London, and Mr. Hampton's just keeping out of the way in the drawing room.
Sensible man.
Reading his newspaper. And they actually leave you shortly after breakfast on Friday morning. There are many tears on Mrs. Hampton's part. Mr. Hampton gives you a good pat on the arm. I presume that's when you're handing over your gifts to them.
Yeah. Definitely.
They're very appreciative. Mr. Hampton comments, at least he'll have something nice to nibble on in the carriage as they make their way back into town.
Oh, she gives them both a big hug and a kiss goodbye and says how much she's enjoyed herself. And I do so look forwards to seeing you again. And perhaps next season, perhaps I'll bring a husband with me.
Mrs. Hampton does that little giggle thing again. Oh, my dear, yes. Oh, that would be wonderful. Yes. Oh, the thought of you married, and after just one season. It would warm my heart, I swear.
And of course, dear Harriet as well. Off to London for a ball as well. Things are moving so quickly. She's growing up so fast, isn't she?
Oh, I do hope she'll be sensible, my dear. She's something of a flibbertigibbet, I do believe. But I suppose not every young woman can have as sensible a head on her shoulders as Eleanor and yourself.
Well, we were all young once, weren't we?
You're far from old now, my dear. I mean, I know 20 is not venerable and certainly not on the shelf, not yet. But obviously, time is ticking. The clock is ticking.
It is indeed.
And yes, speaking of which, yes, we really should be on our way. Oh, do enjoy yourself, my dear, do enjoy yourself. Please write.
Of course I will. I shall write as soon as I'm settled at the vicarage.
Oh, I so look forward to reading your missive. If you send it to the townhouse in London, and I shall pick it up after this event, that whatever it is that Mr. Hampton's got us roped into now.
I shall. Have a wonderful journey.
And you, my dear, and you. And then Mr. Hampton sort of like basically starts ushering her out of the house and grumbling in that sort of way that you've come to know that it sounds harsher than it is, you know, because they dote on each other. So eventually they manage to head off slightly later than expected, and you're left on your own in the house.
Peace and quiet for the first time all summer, most likely.
Yes.
But she's not good at peace and quiet. She's always got to be doing something. She's definitely recharges by being around people. So I think she kind of tries to sit and read for a couple of minutes and just, can't really concentrate. Never mind. So she just kind of goes through the house, just wanders through to make certain that she hasn't left anything behind, just kind of daydreaming a little bit about what's going to await her in Hampshire and making sure she has everything and that her hair is arranged nicely so that when she steps out of the carriage she doesn't look too travel weary and too travel stained, and choosing which one of her new bonnets goes best with her travelling dress.
Oh, in that case, give me a fashion roll.
Oh, okay. Oh, I walked into that one, didn't I?
You did.
Shouldn't have done that, should I? Especially as I just rolled a 75 against 60. What is with these dice today? Ah.
Well, you're spending so long trying to work out which bonnet you should take that you're slightly surprised when there's a firm, loud knock at the door.
Oops. And she picks up her skirts and runs down the stairs, knowing that she's late.
Yes, and you get there as the housekeeper is opening the door, and there is a footman standing there, very, very smartly dressed. More smartly dressed than you would have expected, to be quite honest, and there's a very smart carriage standing in the street outside with an unfamiliar coat of arms painted on the door.
What does the coat of arms look like?
Give me a no roll.
Okay. She's quite well educated, but this is just... this is really not good. 90 against 75. Oh, I'm going to use really real dice next session.
You're so flustered because you've been taken by surprise. I mean, it's a coat of arms. It's got feathers. It's got animals. It's got shields. You know, it's nothing that you really recognise. As you're sort of standing there looking slightly surprised, you're snapped out of it by the footman, who announces in very sonorous tone, Miss Eleanor Mortimer would like to invite Miss Chatterjee to join her in the carriage so that they may make haste to Osney Grange.
Oh, yes, of course. She takes one look back at the house. It's been such a nice summer, and climbs up, presumably with the assistance of the footman, into the carriage.
Oh, yes, with the assistance of the footman. While various staff from the house are busy loading things onto the back of the carriage for you so that you have all of your things with you. And as you're handed into the carriage by the footman, Eleanor is there waiting for you.
Eleanor, my dear, what a lovely carriage.
It is rather, isn't it? There are some advantages to having a wealthy squire as your uncle-in-law.
Ah, is that the coat of arms?
Yes, this is Squire Goodwin's.
Goodwin, of course. Well, we shall cut quite the dash, shan't we, when we arrive?
Yes, I mean, it's far more really than... I don't suppose it's really that Henry couldn't afford it. It's just that it's rather more ostentatious than my dear brother would run to. But he doesn't keep a carriage himself because the squire has always been so kind in allowing us to use his. No sense in going to that sort of expense when there's something like this at one's disposal.
So he is quite close to Squire Goodwin still?
I wouldn't have said close necessarily. The squire and Charlotte were very, very close. I mean, he was her uncle. He effectively ended up as her guardian after her own father died. And he's taken it upon himself to take myself and Henry under his wing since Charlotte's death. Not that either of us particularly need to be taken under anyone's wing, but he's a dear old soul. A little patronising, but I suppose that's just his age. And it would seem cruel to sever links with him, given that really Henry's his only family left now, even if it only is by marriage.
Well, family is very important, isn't it? It is so important to have somebody who you know you can count on.
Exactly. Yes, you're right. You are completely right, as always. Yes, I'm so glad that you've agreed to come down to Osney Grange this weekend. It'll be wonderful to show you the vicarage and perhaps get Henry out of himself again. He did seem to enjoy last night.
Yes, I enjoyed it too. It was, I think, the start of something very memorable.
Give me a psychology roll, please.
Okay. Of course, it's another failure. 51 against 25. This is a record for me. It really is.
Isn't
I think I've only had one success.
I think you have, actually. Oh, no, two. I mean, we know the dice roller in Roll20 can be very dramatic, but it's really going for it this evening.
It really is. Okay, we need to exorcise this, I think.
Talk nicely to it, offer it tea and cake.
Yep, reassurance roll on the dice bot.
So with that, the carriage pulls away. You know it's going to be a 6-hour journey. You stop a couple of times to change the horses and refresh yourselves. Thankfully, the weather holds, so it is perhaps a little cooler now than it was yesterday, but thankfully it doesn't rain, so you make good time into Hampshire. How are you going to entertain yourself during the journey? Do you wish to chat more to Eleanor? Do you wish to read? Do you wish to write letters to people while you're on the move? Or do you just plan on watching the scenery roll by?
I think a bit of everything, really. She's got the novels that she bought at the bookbinders. Maybe she packed a pack of cards in her day bag. They can play whatever was considered a ladylike game, not a gambling one. Just, I guess, whatever's the equivalent of Snap in the 1810s.
You can certainly do that. And you pass the journey very pleasantly. And you head into Hampshire. And soon you arrive at the village of Osney Grange. And it seems like a quaint little village. It has a public house, the Royal Oak, half-timbered building, very quaint looking. Not, of course, that someone of your station would particularly be frequenting such an establishment. And there seemed to be quite a lot of labourers wandering in and out of the building. There seems to be quite a large haberdasher's there as well, which is slightly surprising. It's a very pretty rural village, but definitely not particularly large.
Oh, it's quaint. She's a little bit dismayed at the thought of if she does get married, then this would have to be her home, and it doesn't look like it's got a great amount going on. But there is, of course, Squire Goodwin, and I'm sure he's got things happening in his manor.
Yes, you see the walls for the manor as the carriage drives along through the village, but obviously you don't actually get to see the manor. But what you do see is you pull up to a junction and the carriage turns and you go past the church, which Eleanor points out to you. Oh yes, that's the Church of St. Sithneys. That's Henry's church. It's a rather lovely building, very old, very historic. Perhaps we can take a turn around it tomorrow once you've settled in. Have a look round the village.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Excellent. I know the village isn't that large, but it's very pleasant. I'm sure you'll have a lovely time here.
I'm sure I will.
Now, it is a sleepy village. You're about 40 miles northwest of Brighton now, and from the map when you were at the bookbinders, you saw that you're about 20 miles east of Winchester. So now the announcement in the newspaper makes sense as to why the organ was gifted to Winchester, because it's the nearest city. As you pull up to the vicarage, you see that it's a modest 2-storey stone building, and there's a stone set in the wall above the door that announces that it was built in 1753. The ivy creeps over the exterior. It's early evening now, shortly after 6 p.m, so the sun is starting to fail. The garden actually looks attractive, but slightly overgrown.
Oh, it's charming. It's quite charming.
Yes, it is. Really need to get the gardener in to do a little more work on it. I can't believe how it's grown since I've been away. Really, poor Henry, he must have been so distracted. Yes, well, I'll see about that tomorrow. Here we are, let us go down. You must be tired after your journey. Oh, and there's Henry waiting to greet us. And as the carriage pulls up in front of the house, you see that Reverend Mortimer is indeed standing on the doorstep with a smile on his face waiting to greet you.
And Janitra gives him her biggest and most charming smile.
So the footman helps you out of the carriage. Are you walking straight up to Reverend Mortimer, or are you waiting for Eleanor to do the polite thing and reintroduce you?
Oh, she'll wait and do what's supposed to be done, I think, although she will be giving him a smile as she waits.
You walk up, he shakes your hand. Miss Chatterjee, I'm so pleased that you accepted Eleanor's invitation. It is lovely to see you again so soon.
Reverend Mortimer, thank you so much. I can't tell you how excited I was when I received the invitation. The village is quite charming, and what a lovely home you have.
As you say that, and you're looking at it while you're standing there, it's kind of like, I mean, it's not that old a building. It's, less than 60 years old, but it does look a little bit run down, actually.
Run down as in neglected, as though people haven't been living here, or just...
Definite an air of neglect. Yes, kind of like the garden, like it's sort of got away from them. It hasn't been maintained recently, is probably the best description.
Okay. And Eleanor lives here, is that right?
Yes, she does.
Okay. She's quite surprised that as mistress of the house, she hasn't been keeping up. Maybe she just needs somebody who can have a good talking to the servants and just get them to work a bit harder. Perhaps dear Eleanor has just been too preoccupied with looking after her brother and helping him over his loss. Perhaps that's all it is. Maybe that will be something she can think about, is kind of helping get the house running back the way it should be.
As you're taking all this in, you realise that the Reverend Mortimer is still chatting away. Far more chatty than he was 2 days ago. Perhaps it's just that he's on home turf, that he feels a lot more comfortable here. He certainly seems very pleased to see you. Can you give me, let's say, an etiquette roll?
Come on, etiquette roll. Finally, a hard success. 15 against 60.
It's very nice to be welcomed this warmly, but really, possibly slightly more warmly than is acceptable, given the fact that you literally only met him on Wednesday evening, and you didn't spend that much time with him.
Well, perhaps this is just like when he met his former wife. Maybe he's the type to give his heart very, very quickly. Who knows?
Yes. I mean, presumably that's it. Perhaps it's just the excitement of having visitors.
Yes, it could well be. Although she does note that this is unusual, and it's one more mysterious thing to file away about this gentleman.
Indeed it is. And as you're sort of pondering this, it's almost like he suddenly realises that he's been going on a little bit too long. He says, oh, forgive me, you've had a long journey. You must be anxious to freshen up. Please, come in. And he steps in and encourages you to follow him into the house.
And in she goes.
As you step across the threshold, you notice that the floorboards are slightly creaky, and there's a bit of a draught. Shortly after you and Eleanor and the Reverend actually manage to get in through the door, you feel a sudden strong gust of wind around your ankles, and the door slams shut behind you with a resounding thud.
She jumps a bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry, says Eleanor. The doors in this house sometimes, they do that. They stick, and then they'll just suddenly slam shut. You'll get used to it. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too often. But yes, it can take one by surprise when it does. I do hope you're not too shocked, dear.
Oh, no, not of course. It's characterful, isn't it?
Oh, it's definitely characterful, yes. We definitely need to see about those drafts before the winter, though. Yes, I can't believe that things have got so away from Henry. I shouldn't have spent the entire season in Brighton. I really should have been here. Never mind. Yes, I'll take this all in hand tomorrow.
She's glad to hear that, definitely. I think she'd be quite worried if Eleanor didn't realise that this is a problem for the house. Yeah, now that she knows that Eleanor is going to keep it in hand, she's confident about that now.
The Reverend, on the other hand, is just looking slightly bemused, as if it's news to him that the house is drafty. And he sort of looks at his sister, slightly quizzically, and then sort of nods. And, obviously, Miss Chatterjee, I'd be most honoured if you could join myself and Eleanor for for dinner, but I'll also quite understand if you're exhausted by the trip and would prefer to just have a quiet evening to yourself. Um, the housekeeper will take you to your room, and we'll get you settled in. And then it's Mrs. Phillips. Yes, Mrs. Phillips. And an older lady wanders out from a door towards the back of the hall. If you could show Miss Chatterjee to her room, please, I would be most obliged. Most obliged.
I'll be very glad to join you for dinner, Reverend Mortimer.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'll leave you to settle in. And Eleanor, it's lovely to see you again. I'm so glad you're home. I've missed you. I'll just go and have a word with Cook to see how dinner's coming along.
And with another little smile for him, she follows Mrs. Phillips up to the guest room.
Which is rather a large room, actually. You're quite surprised when you get there. It's large, it's well furnished. There's a four-poster bed, actually, against one wall. A lovely bay window with a very stylish dressing table in it. And a fire's been laid in the grate, ready for lighting for this evening. And there's a heavy wooden chest at the foot of the bed. Give me an intelligence roll, please.
Okay. 48 against 55. Regular success. Now I'm in Hampshire. Things are looking up.
It's a lovely room, but it doesn't look like a guest room. I mean, to be quite honest, this looks more like it would be the master bedroom.
Janitra looks at Mrs. Phillips and says, thank you. This is a very lovely room. Do you have many guests staying here? It seems so very well appointed.
Oh, it is, ma'am. Yes, it is. No, we don't get many guests here. Not since the mistress died. This was her room, their room, if you understand.
I do. Oh, the poor Reverend. It must be so difficult for him to have slept here alone. If you forgive me being indelicate for a moment, if he's been so used to this being where he had such a happy memories.
Yes, ma'am. And, well, there's the rather unfortunate view out of the window, too.
Oh. And she looks out the window.
As she looks out of the window, as the sun is lowering in the sky, she can see a large, square monument stone surrounded by iron railings with a large stone urn set on top of it.
Oh. Is that Mrs. Mortimer's tomb?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, how terrible. To have to see that every day, the poor man.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I quite understand why he would not wish to sleep here.
Yes, ma'am. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back downstairs to help see to dinner. But if there's anything you need, of course, please do let me know. I hope you settle in well. The gong will sound and for you to come down.
Thank you, Mrs. Phillips. You've been very kind.
You're very welcome, ma'am. And she politely backs out and closes the door behind you.
Well, her heart has definitely gone out to Reverend Mortimer. She does wonder why he didn't perhaps seek a different position after Charlotte died. It must have been so hard to stay here with that constant reminder there out of the window. She thinks maybe if it had been her, she would have asked to be transferred to a different parish. But maybe he's loyal to his parish. Maybe he has his congregation who care about him. Maybe he wanted to stay. That's a good stoic man, that.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Washes her face and hands and unpacks her things and maybe takes a little nap and then dresses for dinner.
So you sit down to the dressing table. Are you going to go through the drawers?
She can't not really, can she? you can't. It's like that's the rule number one of staying in a spooky Regency era house is look through the dead woman's things.
Well, I mean, all the drawers are empty. You do find a broken cufflink in one of the drawers, but as you're pulling the drawers, you hear what sounds like the sound of paper slipping down the back of one of them.
Oh, her curiosity is piqued. And she kind of fiddles with the drawer a bit to see if she can work out where that noise is coming from and where the paper might have fallen.
Withdraw one of the drawers, and in the bottom of the bit that the drawers are sitting in, you find this piece of paper.
Ooh.
Can you describe it for our listeners, please?
Yes, it's a torn piece of paper with some drawings of plants, of flowers, something which looks like some kind of, maybe it's a lily of some kind. I don't know much about flowers. But something which also says, wash hands after handling. Pollen is fatal in large quantities. This looks like it's a handwritten book. It's come from a journal of some kind rather than a published book. Other things written on it says, it is said that those who did taste the seeds of said plant were witness to the most terrifying vision. Can't quite read it.
Okay. While the left-hand piece, running at a strange angle down the corner of the page, seems to read heliotropium or hellebore, ? Text is unclear.
Oh yes. And we'll need to concoct a tincture for maximum potency. Beamish says he can get hold of Perdiculus tamulosus in sufficient quantity.
How interesting.
Now, he looked for a cure, didn't he?
He did.
That was what the gossip said.
It did.
But this doesn't sound like a cure. This sounds like a poison.
Well, can you give me either a natural world or a natural philosophy roll, please?
Okay. What have I got for those? I've only got base 01 in natural philosophy. So for natural world, which is slightly better, I've got 10.
No.
The curse returns. 89 against 10.
Let's be fair, the chances of getting that were never zero, but it makes no sense. I mean, you do know that sometimes poisons in small doses can actually be very efficacious, but this is just nonsense to you, really.
This is worrying nonsense as well.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Particularly where it says, it is said that those who did taste the seeds of said plant were witness to the most terrifying vision. Is that a warning? Okay. This is something that she knows she probably wasn't supposed to see.
Yes, you get the feeling that it had definitely fallen down the back of the drawer without anyone realising that it had done so.
She folds it up and puts it at the back of one of the other drawers, not back down inside the body of the chest of drawers where she can't get it again, but just kind of somewhere in a drawer that people wouldn't necessarily see if they just opened it to put things in.
And as you're folding it up and putting it away, you hear the gong for dinner.
And down she goes to the dining room.
As you're going down the stairs and heading for the dining room, can you give me a spot hidden roll, please?
I can indeed. I've got 60 in spot hidden. Oh, what is wrong with me? 77 against 60.
You can see that the vicarage is decorated in a rather functional, slightly plain style. And there are various family portraits and, as you might expect, religious iconography on the walls, but nothing spectacular, rather understated. And when you get into the dining room, to be honest, it all looks a little bit drab and unloved, really, is the distinct impression that you're getting.
Well, perhaps Mrs. Mortimer had her mind on other things. And if she was ill for such a long time, perhaps she just never really thought about having the house remodelled. But perhaps she can help with that. Maybe one day Janitra will have it redone to something a little bit more contemporary, a little bit more fashionable.
Another project. And the Reverend is waiting for you. Eleanor arrives shortly after you. You sit down for dinner. The Reverend says grace before you begin. And the cook brings in various bowls of a rather homely-looking stew, it must be said. It smells wonderful. But yes, it's not quite what you were expecting, to be quite honest. I mean, it looks great. It smells fantastic. But, yes, stew isn't exactly what you were expecting.
Well, she's going to make the best of it. She supposes she's spent all summer dining in the best restaurants and having wonderful dinner parties. Perhaps she's just kind of forgotten that daily life in the countryside isn't maybe as glamorous. And, oh well, perhaps some old-fashioned plain cooking is what she could do with to remind her of that, she thinks. But yeah, it would certainly benefit from a little bit of seasoning, maybe.
Yes, it's very much in the English style, shall we say.
Janitra grew up with curries, of course,
Yes.
from her background. And yeah, she definitely could have done with a bit more flavour.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's tasty, it's warming, it's hearty. It's pork, maybe veal, you think? Could you give me a spot hidden roll, please?
I can. Another failure, because of course it is, because that's 68 against 60.
The Mortimers are both tucking into a stew as well. Eleanor's enjoying it. The Reverend seems to be picking at it, to be quite honest. He doesn't seem to be particularly hungry. And then he sort of looks up at you apologetically and sort of says, well, I suppose you're used to far more exciting fare than this, Miss Chatterjee?
Oh, this is perfectly pleasant.
Yes, it was one of Charlotte's favourite recipes. I know it's nothing particularly exciting by society standards, but you know, after a long day's travelling and finding yourself somewhere new, something simple and straightforward and hearty, I thought might be an interesting and possibly welcome change. I do hope I wasn't wrong.
Oh no, it's delicious. It's absolutely what one needs after a long journey is just something substantial.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. And he seems to perk up at that. And he starts to chat happily to you, and he asks you about your family and your situation.
Janitra is quite close to her parents, so she's very happy to talk about her life and her background and how she was born in Kolkata in India. And I think she came over as a baby. She doesn't really remember anything of India, but she grew up in a lovely house and she's very close to her parents. She has no brothers or sisters, so she had them all to herself and she's very fond of them. And she shows them a locket that she very rarely takes off. And it's a locket with a little miniature painting of both her parents inside it. And it's one of her most treasured possessions.
Eleanor coos over the workmanship, which is slightly unusual for her. She's not normally taken with that sort of thing, but you suspect it's the mention of family has sort of like touched her, and the Reverend examines it, comments on what a handsome couple your parents make, asks you various questions about growing up as an only child. He's always had Eleanor there, so he finds the concept of this quite fascinating.
I would so love to have a sister. She gives a meaningful look to Eleanor.
Eleanor smiled back.
I mean, of course, I always had plenty of friends and plenty of playmates as a child. And my dear governess, Miss Sinclair, she was quite my closest friend when I was a child. Of course, as a governess rather than a playmate, but it would be so wonderful to have the society of a dear sister. Somebody like, well... And she deliberately blushes a little bit and gives a little smile.
It seems to have completely gone over the Reverend's head. Eleanor, though, you get from the gentle inclination of the head and the slight smile that she's completely understood what you've just said.
And she finishes the stew, boring as it is.
And you retire to the drawing room after dinner. And again, it's slightly dusty, slightly unloved. There is a pianoforte in the corner, but that, again, has an air of not having been used in quite a while. In fact, you notice that the Reverend chooses a chair where he's not facing it, so he can't actually see it.
Janitra assumes this belonged to Charlotte. In fact, it looks like it hasn't been played for quite some time, and he's quite deliberately facing away. So it's probably quite good that Janitra has no musical talent whatsoever, because it might be expected that she'd offer to play for them as an after-dinner diversion. But she's, she can thump out a tune, but she's not great. As I said, she knows her skills and she knows what aren't her skills. So she thinks about asking Eleanor if she plays, but she won't. And instead, perhaps we could have another game of cards. We were playing all through our journey down. Reverend, would you care to join us?
Oh, yes, that would be a most diverting exercise, I think. Yes, it'd be interesting to play with someone new rather than just Eleanor. She's not the best at it, I'm afraid. And I do occasionally have to let her win.
How very gentlemanly of you.
So you sit down to cards, and it's a friendly game. He's not wrong. Eleanor isn't the best card player. And while you're enjoying the game, that you hear a loud knock on the door.
You expecting guests at this hour?
No, I wasn't. A footman comes in and says very respectfully, Reverend Mortimer, Dr. Beamish is at the door. He wishes to discuss an urgent matter with you. Should I show him through to the library, sir?
Beamish. Heard that before, haven't I? Beamish was mentioned in that torn-off page, I think.
He was.
And I think he was also mentioned. Did he attend Charlotte? Is that where I've heard that before?
Well, you know that he was a physician from London who retired to Osney Grange and took up a practice, so it's probably fair to assume that he was Charlotte's doctor, given that it's really not that big a place. You can't imagine there being two physicians around here.
No. And if he's from London, then presumably he's one of the best. Better than you would get in a more provincially educated doctor, is what Janitra would assume, I think.
As you're thinking this, you see this large, very well-dressed man wander past the drawing room door, and he sort of looks in and catches sight of you, and this really rather lascivious grin spreads across his face. And he nods at you in what you can only describe as a far too familiar manner for someone that you've not even been introduced to.
Oh, we got a creeper.
Yes, looking at Eleanor's face, she's obviously not a fan. Her face has gone very stony.
Janitra doesn't smile back. She just gives the slightest of politely, but coolly politely nods, because to do otherwise would be considered rude.
The Reverend Mortimer stands up and sort of like rushes out towards the door and sort of joins this Beamish gentleman, and they head off out of sight.
Eleanor, who was that? Did you see the way he looked?
I did see it, I did.
That was not appropriate at all.
Dr. Beamish, a most objectionable chap. I don't know why Henry continues to entertain him.
Well, you've known him a long time, then?
No, he moved here 9 months perhaps before dear Charlotte died. Being a London physician, we assumed that he would know what was best for her when she took ill, but I don't like the man. There's just something about him.
Yes, I can hardly blame you. He looked very forward.
Yes, forward. That's... Yes. Well, this is Henry's house. There is nothing I can say, really. But I do wish he would discourage the gentleman from coming around.
Well, we shall just have to chaperone each other while he's here, shan't we?
We shall indeed. We shall indeed. Well, hopefully the man won't stay too long. Well, I don't know about you, my dear, but I'm feeling rather tired. I feel the need to retire for the evening fairly soon.
Yes, of course. It's been a long day, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I'm so pleased you're here. Janitra, it's wonderful to have some feminine company about the house again. I mean, obviously there are the servants, but...
I feel quite the same way, and I'm so glad you invited me.
Yes, I'm so glad I did. I think you'll make a real difference here.
I do hope so.
Oh, so do I. So do I. Well, if you'll excuse me, I'd rather not be around when Beamish finishes whatever it is he has with Henry.
Yes, of course. Sleep well, my dear.
And you, if there's anything that you should need, please don't hesitate to ring for one of the servants. There's only one that actually sleeps on the premises. That's Mrs. Phillips. Mrs. Phillips will see to your needs should you require anything during the evening.
Thank you very much. I will see you in the morning then.
You shall indeed, and then perhaps a stroll around the village?
That would be wonderful, yes.
Excellent. Well, I shall see you at breakfast. Sleep well.
And you. Good night.
And she smiles and heads off up the stairs.
Janitra will stay in the drawing room a little while. She'll maybe play a hand of solitaire while she waits for her host to finish his business. But now, out of character, I'm not certain whether it would be appropriate for her to stay up once the hostess has gone to sleep, and whether that's something that would not be acceptable, particularly as she'll be alone with the gentleman.
Exactly. So you think it would be polite to say goodnight to the Reverend? It probably isn't acceptable for you to step, particularly not as Beamish is around as well.
Yeah. In that case, she will call the footman and say, please give my compliments to the master of the house and tell him that I have retired for the evening, and thank him for a very warm welcome, and that I look forward to seeing him in the morning.
Yes, miss. I'll do that before I head home. I'll make sure I pass your message on. Good night, miss.
Good night.
And he disappears off.
And Janitra will head up to her room.
The fire has been lit. The room is warm, perhaps a little bit warmer than is strictly necessary this evening. It's still not that cold. Interestingly, though, the curtains haven't been drawn.
She'll open the window just a tiny bit. This is still very early in the autumn. This is mid-September, I think you said?
Yeah.
Yes, so with the fire lit, it is getting a little warm. So she'll look out over the graveyard and everything else that she can see out there, and wondering if this is going to be her new home one day.
As you open the window, you see that the moon is out. It's not quite a full moon, but it's not far off. And there it's casting a beautiful silvery light over the churchyard. And of course your eye can't help but be drawn to the tomb that you're assuming is Charlotte's. And you're slightly surprised to see a figure standing next to it. It seems to be a woman. They seem to be dressed in white and with a faded bonnet. I mean, they're too far away for you to make out anything in particular, but they seem almost to be glowing in the light of the moon.
How unusual. What kind of woman would be out there this late, alone, unchaperoned in a graveyard?
Precisely. And as you're thinking that, the cloud passes over the moon, and when it's gone, the figure has disappeared.
Must have been a trick of the light.
It must have been. There's definitely nobody down there now.
How odd. She closes the curtains, feeling slightly uncomfortable.
You settle down to bed. Are you reading before you go to bed?
Yes, I think so. I think she'll just finish the chapter of the novel that she was reading in the carriage.
And as you're reading, you hear the front door open and close and muffled voices, so you're assuming that's Dr. Beamish leaving. You hear footsteps coming up the stairs, which you assume are the Reverend Mortimer's. And heading past your door, you hear another door close.
At this point, knowing that Beamish is gone, which is good, she decides to settle down and sleep. It's been a long day.
It has. It has. And you drift off to sleep. You're right, it has been a long day. And your brain is whirring with thoughts of, could this be your new home? The plot of your novel, the lascivious grin that Dr. Beamish gave you, the strange figure in the graveyard that you fleetingly saw, or think you saw. And it's all been a very exciting, very exhausting day. And you don't know how long you sleep, but you're suddenly woken by something. And it takes you a second as you struggle awake to realise what that is. There are man's cries, a man's voice calling out in what sounds like anguish.
Is it a familiar voice?
I mean, it's a little bit muffled, but it does sound like the Reverend Mortimer, to be quite honest.
Where's it coming from? Is it coming from inside the house?
Yes. I mean, you'd have to get up and go for a bit of an investigate.
Yes, Janitra will get up and she'll pull on a dressing gown and take a candle and she'll just stick her head out of the door. She won't go wandering around the house because it's not her house in the middle of the night and it wouldn't really be proper, but she'll kind of look outside down the corridor and see if there's anything to see.
There's nothing to see, but you can definitely hear cries coming from a room across the corridor from you, which is where you heard the footsteps heading to earlier.
Is there anything coming from Eleanor's room?
Give me a listen roll, please.
Okay. A hard success. Yay! 22 against 50.
You can't hear anything at all coming from Eleanor's room, but you can make out odd snatches of words. You'd have to get closer to actually be able to hear them all, but you hear Charlotte's name mentioned several times.
Yes, Janitra's going to creep closer. She's going to take the candle with her, but she's kind of going to put her hand in front of the flame just to kind of muffle it a little bit. She's just going to very slowly and carefully, trying to avoid any creaky floorboards, try and creep towards the other door.
Okay. Do you want to give me a stealth roll, please?
I would love to give you a stealth roll, although I've only got 20, so let's see how badly I mess this one up. Ah, a success! Hooray! 18 against 20.
Your caution pays off. You manage to sneak quietly towards the door of what you assume is the Reverend Mortimer's bedchamber, without hitting any of the creaky floorboards. And you can hear now exactly what it is. He's crying out. Why? Oh, Charlotte, why? Why must you haunt me thus? Please, oh, my love, forgive me. Forgive me, Charlotte. No, please, no.
The poor man. She hesitates for a moment because this is not really what a lady ought to do, but her heart has gone out to him, as I've said, and so she very gently taps on his door. Reverend? Reverend, is everything all right?
Miss Chatterjee?
Are you unwell, Reverend?
I don't understand. And you hear movement from inside the room and footsteps coming towards the door.
I'm so sorry, but I heard a disturbance. I thought you might be unwell. Should I wake Mrs. Phillips and ask her to bring you a warming drink? Or some brandy, perhaps?
Yes. Yes, actually, Miss Chatterjee, that would be most welcome. I thank you again for your consideration. I do apologise most strenuously if I've disturbed you.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm thinking only of you. I was concerned.
And it was a nightmare, nothing more. I do occasionally get them. But But yes, yes, a brandy would be most helpful. Yes, please, Mrs. Phillips will take care of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. I hope you sleep well. I shall go immediately.
Much appreciated, Miss Chatterjee. Thank you. Yes.
And she heads off to Mrs. Phillips's room.
Mrs. Phillips is roomed down in the kitchen, in a little room just off there. She's slightly surprised at being woken, by you at least anyway, but of course once you say that the Reverend would like a brandy, you see the sort of like a knowing look, and she just sort of thanks you for letting her know and suggests that you go back to bed and not worry yourself about it. She'll take a brandy up to the master. She'll warm it slightly, just,
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. Thank you. You are a good and faithful servant.
Thank you, ma'am. Now you rest your pretty heads and don't you worry any more about it.
I won't, but please tell him he's in my thoughts, and I hope he has a restful rest of the night.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
And as she makes her way back up the stairs, she thinks about that white figure she saw in the graveyard. Why must you haunt me, Charlotte? Those words. It can't be. Surely not. There's no such thing as ghosts. It's just this novel that she was reading. There's just something that she's concocted in her head. And it's true what the doctors say, that women shouldn't read novels because it's very bad for them and it overheats the brain. And maybe she should have just read something instructive instead, like some sermons.
Can you give me a sanity roll, please?
I can indeed. What have I got for sanity? 50, which isn't too bad. Oh, 97 against 50.
Thankfully not a fumble. That's 1 point of sanity. Because you've spooked yourself. There's dark house, there's creaky floorboards, there's strange drafts coming from all over the place. As you're walking back to your room, you can hear strange scratching noises in the walls. Or can you? Is it just your imagination? So no, you've spooked yourself as you head back into your room and settle back down into bed.
She pulls the covers right up to the top of her head and makes sure that her feet are tucked in so that the monsters can't grab her feet. And she kind of crawls up into a very little ball and hugs her pillow and closes her eyes and is determined to go to sleep.
And as you're lying there, curled up, thinking happy thoughts, all you can hear is from the walls and the ceiling around you.
And she doesn't like this at all.
You do sleep, but it's a slightly fitful night. I mean, part of you is expecting more shouts and cries from the Reverend, but thankfully there aren't any. And the scratching seemed to abate at some point, or at least you assume it did. You fell asleep eventually, and you're woken by the sunlight falling onto the curtains. And there's a gentle tap at the door.
Who is it?
Mrs. Phillips, ma'am. Cup of tea for you.
Oh, Mrs. Phillips, do come in.
And Mrs. Phillips appears with a tray with a cup of tea for you.
Oh, that's such a welcome sight. How is the Reverend, Mrs. Phillips?
Much improved after his brandy, miss.
Ah, that's good. A good brandy will always set a gentleman right, as I understand it from my father.
That's quite right, miss. If you need any help dressing, I'll be more than happy to come and give you a hand after I've seen to Miss Eleanor. And breakfast will be served in a little while, miss, if you'd like to make your way down when you're ready.
Thank you. Yes, I would appreciate a little help. Thank you.
I'll go see to the mistress then, ma'am, and I shall come back. And she disappears off.
Janitra will open the curtains and look out over the graveyard and just look down to that tomb again and just see if there's any sign of what she saw last night. She's wondering if maybe it was an animal. I don't know. We're in the countryside. Perhaps it was a deer, a white deer or something, just standing at a strange angle and it looked like a person. She's not certain. She's just trying to rationalize it in her head.
You are in the country. There is woodland all around the village. There might be a white deer somewhere nearby. You can certainly tell yourself that.
Yes, that was what it was. It was a white hart, nothing else. Yes. Drinks tea.
Mrs. Phillips comes back 10-15 minutes later and helps you to get ready.
And she dresses in something appropriate for the countryside. Maybe a kind of a tweed pelisse or something over her morning dress.
Mm-hmm. That sounds very appropriate. And Mrs. Phillips guides you down to the dining room. Reverend Mortimer is already there, Eleanor is already there, and they both greet you cordially. You notice the Reverend looks a little bit tired. There are definitely dark shadows under his eyes, but he seems pleased to see you, and he makes no mention of the previous night.
And Janitra gives him a smile. It would be rude to mention that she saw him feeling unwell or feeling disturbed, so she doesn't. And she just gives a smile to him and sits down and, good morning.
Good morning.
Country air is so refreshing, isn't it?
I've always found it to be so, yes. Wouldn't you agree, Eleanor? And Eleanor smiles and nods and... Did you sleep well, Janitra, my dear?
Oh, well, it was such a long journey in the carriage. I fear maybe I was a little stiff and a little disturbed, perhaps, by my long sitting in place for a long time and that novel I was reading. I don't know. I had a slightly disturbed night, but I'm sure I shall do much better once we've taken a little walk.
Oh, yes, fresh air, stretch our legs. I'm sure that will be most welcome. Henry, would you care to join us this morning? I'm sure you can spare a little time.
Yes, Reverend, do.
He looks a bit like a rabbit in the headlights, to be honest. He was slightly surprised by this suggestion, but he sort of ponders and said, actually, yes, I do need to pop to the church today, put up the hymn numbers for Sunday service. Yes, I think that would be most pleasant. Thank you for the invitation. If you don't mind, Miss Chatterjee.
Oh, of course not. I should love to see your church. Perhaps you could give me a tour.
Yes. I'd be most pleased to. Yes.
She totally intends to go into the graveyard at some point, but she's not going to say that. Just to reassure herself that it was just a white deer that she saw.
Breakfast passes off with sort of fairly urbane, standard English conversation about the weather and the harvest season, and the Reverend's planning what he's going to talk about at Sunday service, and it all passes very pleasantly.
Well, shall we make a start, Eleanor, Reverend?
Eleanor smiles. Oh yes, I think that would be excellent. I'll just go and have a quick word with Cook to make sure that she has everything in hand for this evening.
Wonderful. I shall go and fetch my bonnet.
Shall we meet in the vestibule and then we can head out?
Yes, let's.
You fetch your bonnet, you come downstairs. The Reverend Mortimer is putting on his overcoat and picks a pine walking stick out of a tub in the hallway. Eleanor appears and she's fastening her bonnet on as well.
And she waits to be shown the way, because she doesn't know where she's going.
This is very true. Eleanor laughs and slips her arm through yours and leads you out of the vicarage onto the road. Do you want to visit the church first, or do you want to go to the village first?
It depends what the Reverend's plans are. Does he intend to go straight to the church, or does he intend to go for a wander?
He says when Eleanor poses the question to him, it's, well, I can't really let you two ladies go down to the village on your own. I shall accompany you both down there, and then I'll head back to the church. I'm sure you're going to be heading to the haberdashers, aren't you?
Oh, you know me so well already, Reverend.
I know Eleanor, and I know she spends far too much time in there. We don't have much society in Osney Grange, Miss Chatterjee, but what we have can be found there usually.
Well, I make it a habit to never pass up the opportunity to buy ribbon.
He smiles. A woman after my sister's heart, Miss Chatterjee.
We shall be good friends, just like sisters, as I said.
It still seems to have completely passed him by. And he sets off down the road with you. I mean, the church, as you're passing it, is a Norman church. It's not very large. The graveyard seems to be very well maintained. There are some oak and yew trees in there. It's very quaint. It's quintessentially English village. It really is. Nothing special, but rooted in the village. You know, it feels like it's been here for a very, very long time.
Quite odd that the graveyard should be so well maintained when the garden at the house is not.
You can only assume that the Reverend has a decent sexton who takes care of these things, who may not be responsible for the vicarage garden.
Again, that's something to file away in her head, because she's going to have a word with the gardener one day. Or maybe the sexton would like some extra work thrown his way. Who knows?
Yes, they probably would. I mean, sextons do quite often do little extra odd jobs for a few coppers. So, yes, definitely something to bear in mind. It's a fine morning. It's a pleasant walk. There's not a lot of people around. I mean, it's a Saturday, but this is an agricultural village. People will be out securing the last of the harvest at this point of the year.
I guess we head to the haberdashers.
Eleanor seems most excited at this prospect. Bizarrely, given the size of the village, this is a very well-stocked haberdashers when you go into it. And to be quite honest, it's a house that's obviously the front parlour has been transformed into a haberdashery shop. And it is absolutely stuffed with racks of lovely fabrics. There are notions, gloves, hats, all sorts of things. I was slightly surprised by it, to be quite honest. Arriving yesterday, you wouldn't have thought that this was the sort of place that would exist in Osney Grange.
How intriguing. I guess Janitra is assuming that there must be some society here. Maybe the Squire Goodwin has a wife or daughters or sister who must be the leader of local fashion. I'm trying to remember. I don't think any female relatives of Goodwin's have been mentioned.
No, they haven't. You've only heard speak of Charlotte having been Goodwin's niece.
I mean, a shop this well stocked couldn't have been patronized just by the vicar's wife. It wouldn't be able to support itself just with that one person. Even if she was going to town for the season every year, that's not enough. That's very odd. But, well, she'll just have to help the local economy while she's here, won't she? Shopping montage!
Shopping montage! Basically, once you're in the haberdashers, Reverend Mortimer looks slightly bored and apologises and says, if you could spare me, ladies, I'm going to head back to the church to make sure everything is in order. I'm sure you'll be quite fine here on my own. You don't really need me for this endeavour.
Oh, well, of course. I wouldn't keep you from your work. Perhaps we'll see you there a little later?
Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea. Yes, enjoy. Oh, here's Mrs. Porter. I'm sure she'll see to all your needs. He says good morning to the lady who has appeared from a back room. You're assuming this Mrs. Porter is the haberdasher's owner, and she smiles, obviously known to Miss Mortimer, and starts to sort of fuss round you, asks if you require refreshments, asks you to take a seat at one of the tables, and she will bring things to you to see, and just really starts to make a fuss of you.
Janitra likes being made a fuss of, I think. And she'll pick out some ribbons, I think, maybe a bit of trim, some lace.
It's really nice quality stuff, actually. The conversation comes out that it's sort of a hub. It did used to be patronised by Squire Goodwin's wife before she died, and various other estates. The women of various other local estates do come here to shop. It is a slightly unusual location. Mrs. Porter freely admits this, but she sort of says that she fell in love with the village and thought that it made a very quaint and charming place to run a business from, and that if one has a prestigious enough business, then clients will come to you.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not too far from Winchester, are we?
We're not, no. We don't have too many ladies from Winchester come, miss, but we do have the occasional one if there's something special that they're after.
Ah, you do have such lovely things. I imagine that the late Mrs. Mortimer, the vicar's wife, I imagine you saw her quite often here. So sad. I've heard all about it.
Yes, miss, it was most sad. Mrs. Mortimer was a good and faithful customer, exquisite taste, even through her illness. Tried to maintain her appearance as best she could, poor woman. Not that we saw her much towards the end. Most sad, most sad.
I've heard that she died quite suddenly, that she'd been ill for quite some time, but that nobody really knew it.
Well, that's what we think now. Looking back, miss, it was clear from earlier that year that something was amiss, but it just crept up so slowly that no one really paid it much mind. But yes, for the last month of her life, she was seriously unwell, miss. Confined to the house, she was. A great shame. Great shame.
Oh, terribly sad. And her doctors? Were they able to make a diagnosis? Did they know what the issue was?
Give me a psychology roll, please.
Okay. Back to my old ways.
That's
oh dear. It is another fumble. 98 against 25. Suddenly she has lost her ability to people.
Yes. You are just so wrapped up in this tragic story that you are oblivious to anything else. You do see that Mrs. Porter casts a glance at Eleanor while she's telling you about this. You assume because she's trying not to upset your friend. Reminder of sad times, obviously. Although she doesn't want to appear rude by not answering your question. And as this is happening, the bell on the door rings and two new people wander in.
Just random customers or anybody that I have seen before?
No, certainly nobody that you've seen before. One is quite a tall woman, and the other one is a good 6 inches shorter. The shorter woman is chatting away merrily, completely oblivious to everything that's going on, whereas the taller woman looks more reserved, a lot more restrained, slightly, how shall we put this, resigned air on her face to this other woman's chattering. And as the doorbell goes, Mrs. Porter turns round. Ah, Miss Cooper, Miss Shibden, what a pleasure to see you this morning.
Janitra will just give a sort of polite nod.
Oh, I say, says the shorter woman. Oh, and a new face. Oh, Miss Mortimer, please do introduce us to your new friend. And Miss Mortimer kind of rolls her eyes a bit. Miss Cooper, this is Miss Janitra Chatterjee. She is a friend that I made this season at Brighton, and she's here to stay with us for the weekend. Miss Chatterjee, this is Miss Amelia Cooper, and her friend, Miss Hannah Shibden.
It's a pleasure to meet you both, ladies, and she gives a very slight curtsy.
You see the taller woman, Miss Shibden, take out a notebook from her reticule and write something down in it.
Slightly surprising, thinks Janitra, but oh well, maybe she's not good with her memory. Maybe she's writing down her name or something, but oh well, we're in the countryside. People do things differently here.
And she looks at you and nods her head. Chatterjee, is that with 2 T's or 1?
Oh, it's with 2 T's. I was born in Kolkata.
Oh, you don't say. And she continues writing. while her little friend just sort of gushes, very excited, obviously. It's almost like a spaniel. You're really getting spaniel vibes here.
She's wagging so much that all the lace is going to fall off the shelf or something.
Very much so, yes. They obviously don't see a lot of newcomers here. This is something of an event. You are an event.
Ooh, an event. I feel so privileged. And whatever is the early 19th century equivalent of a light bulb going off in her head, a candle going off in her head, a whale or lamp, I don't know. She wonders, are you a lady journalist? Writing down my name and the spelling of the name?
Oh, heavens, no. Oh, dear me, no. No, not that sort of woman at all. I just, personal interest.
Oh, you like to keep abreast of the people in town then?
Well, doesn't everyone?
Well, of course. Do you see many visitors in the village?
Well, there's the people that come to, this excellent establishment. And it's, it's the hub for the social season and for respectable people, obviously. I mean, the peasants have the Royal Oak, but, the gentlemen sometimes can go. There's a private room for cards. But no, I mean, this is the place to be for the ladies of the village. And dear Mrs. Mortimer used to spend some time here with us and Miss Mortimer and various other people when she was alive. God rest her soul.
Yes, so very sad to hear what happened to her. You were friends then?
Oh, yes. Yes, we're all friends here in the village, aren't we, Miss Mortimer? And Eleanor's got that stony expression on her face again that you recognise of there's things she'd probably like to say but can't.
Ah, okay. There's obviously some bad blood here, but not knowing exactly what's going on. And I'm guessing I cannot make another psychology roll after that horrible fumble.
No, I'm gonna let you, because this is a different situation.
You are a kind and generous keeper, Lynne. And watch me fail it again. Yes, I did fail it again.
Not as badly, though.
Yeah, not as badly as before. 37 against 25.
With the fact that this woman keeps writing everything down, and the fact that the other woman, Miss Cooper, seems to be chatting away at high speed to Mrs. Porter, you get the distinct feeling that it's more along the lines that you've just met the two village gossips, basically.
Well, they are people who know things, at least, if they are the village gossips.
They are indeed. They are indeed. And the little chatty one, Miss Cooper, turns towards you. Oh, well, it's so nice to see guests at the vicarage again. Oh, it's wonderful news. Because let's face it, I mean, really, there's only Squire Goodwin and Dr. Beamish, and she rolls her eyes, have been guests since dear Mrs. Mortimer's death. Such a tragedy, and such a hasty burial. So few mourners in attendance.
Yes, I met Dr. Beamish last night.
Yes, he's a very strange character, isn't he?
And I think Janitra and her do that thing that women do, silently warning of, yes, that's a wrong un. Let's not have anything to do with him. Forward, wasn't he?
Yes, he's not particularly popular in the village. Not that we would say such things, but there are some that say he left London under rather a cloud.
My goodness. What sort of cloud?
Well, questionable medical practices.
And Reverend Mortimer allowed him to attend his beloved Charlotte.
At this point, you see, this has just been a step too far for Eleanor, who stands up. Well, if you don't mind, Miss Chatterjee, I do really think we should be heading back to the church. We did agree with Henry that he would give you a tour.
Oh, yes, of course. We mustn't keep him waiting. Ladies, it's been a pleasure. Perhaps I'll see you in here again over the weekend.
Oh, well, obviously not tomorrow. It's Sunday. But perhaps if you would like to come to tea this afternoon, Miss Mortimer, do you mind if Miss Chatterjee comes to tea this afternoon? Give me a luck roll.
Okay. 61 luck. Yes, 40 against 61. Regular success.
Miss Mortimer, you can see Eleanor is torn. It's fairly obvious that she'd rather you didn't, but she can't, on the spur of the moment, think of any reason to say why not. And it's also kind of obvious that she's not been invited. It is a bit strange. Awkward. You're kind of in this strange position. You can accept, because it would be rude not to, but you know that it is going to be awkward. So it's really up to you whether you accept or not.
I think Janitra's loyalty would be to Eleanor. She's only just met these two women, and as curious as she really wants to find out more and really pump for information, it's quite clear that Eleanor is, as you say, not invited and also doesn't particularly like these women, perhaps. So she gives a slight nod to Eleanor and says, of course, I would love to join you for tea, but I fear that I do have a prior engagement. As dear Eleanor said, I did promise to have a tour of the church, but I do intend to come back here at some point, now that Eleanor and I are such dear, firm friends. Perhaps next time.
You can see that the two women are disappointed, but they make polite noises about it. Eleanor starts to head out of the shop, but Miss Shibden catches your arm just before you leave and whispers, "It's a queer thing. For a man so in love he's never been seen at his wife's grave. He leaves no flowers there, unlike the squire. The squire regularly leaves them."
That is odd. That's very strange, and there were no mourners at the funeral either.
No, precious few, just the Reverend and his sister and Dr. Beamish.
Why do you think that is? I mean, he must have been quite prostrate with grief.
Well, perhaps that's why, but it's very queer indeed. Not the done thing.
No. Well, I suppose love can explain an awful lot of things which are very strange indeed.
I wouldn't know, Miss Chatterjee. I wouldn't know.
Well, it was lovely to meet you, and as I said, perhaps on another occasion we could have tea.
Yes, that would be most pleasant. I quite understand. It was silly of Miss Cooper to invite you without checking that you weren't previously engaged. She does get very excited sometimes. You'll have to excuse her.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. Enjoy your Saturday.
And you, Miss Chatterjee, and you.
And she goes to hurry to catch up with Eleanor.
So by the time you finish at the haberdasher's, it's getting on towards lunchtime. So Eleanor suggests that you collect Henry from the church and have lunch. And then she has a few things to take care of this afternoon, so she'll let Henry take you for a tour of the church. Not that it's very big, as she points out, but she'll leave you to do that while she gets on with some of the things that she needs to get sorted out now that she's back home again.
It's a very, very pleasant church and such a quaint setting. Norman, I believe somebody said.
It is, yes. The village grew up around the church, as far as I'm aware. It's not much, but it's ours, and we grew up locally. And it is a sweet little church, I think you'll find. But Henry can give you the tour this afternoon. He's very fond of it.
Yes, I can see why he should be. And the churchyard, that is, I believe, where the late Mrs. Mortimer was buried. Is that right? Is it that tomb there with the urn?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Well, it must show great strength to be able to see that every day, to have to go to work here every day and have his late wife, here. Poor man.
It's something that he's struggled with, but his love for this village and his flock and his duty to Charlotte's memory have given him strength.
Yes. Yes, I can see that. Well, I'd like to see it myself, if I may. I'd like to see the tomb and pay my own respects. She must have been a very special woman.
Yes. Yes, she was. Very special. Very special. Do you mind if I run on ahead just to make sure that lunch is going to be ready soon?
Of course, my dear.
Don't take Miss Shibden and Miss Cooper too much to heart. They're terrible gossips, the pair of them. You do have to watch what one says to them, otherwise it'll be all over the county. I suppose their hearts are in the right place. My brother is far more forgiving of such things, but some of the speculation around Charlotte's death was most unpleasant, and it grieves me to hear it. Henry was devastated by the whole situation. She was a young woman, and when the young die young, it causes such gossip amongst the small-minded and those who've never really left the countryside. And the speed with which it happened in the end was, well, I think it just took everybody by surprise, and everybody keeps trying to find an explanation, when really, who knows?
Well, I suppose we never know when our time is up. We can only try to be ready.
Yes. Yes, you're so right. You're so right. Dear Janitra, you satisfy your curiosity, and I'll see you back at the vicarage for lunch.
Yes, I shan't be too long. I'll see you later, my dear.
And she leaves you to it.
Once Eleanor is out of sight, Janitra's going to head into the graveyard, and particularly to look at this tomb.
Yes, I thought you'd make a beeline for that. It is a very well-tended graveyard. The gravestones, as you would expect from a churchyard of this age, are in varying conditions. Some of the old ones are actually really quite heavily weathered, but some of the newer stones are crisp and clear. There are flowers have been left upon them. And at the west end of the graveyard, in the shadow of the vicarage, as you know from having seen it from your bedroom window, is this raised square tomb topped with a stone urn.
Is there any writing? Is there an epitaph?
There is, but there's no epitaph. That literally all it says is, in memory of Charlotte Mortimer, departed this earth 3rd December 1811.
Nothing more personal than that.
No.
How odd. Any flowers have been left here?
No.
The gossips said, I think it was the gossips who said it, that the Reverend doesn't leave flowers, but Squire Goodwin does quite often.
Yes.
And thinking about flowers, Janitra remembers that page she found inside one of the desk drawers and the picture of that strange plant that looked, maybe it looks a bit like a lily or a bit like a morning glory. She isn't certain. But she's going to look around in the flower beds and under the yew trees just to see if there's anything that looks like this one flower.
Give me a spot hidden roll then, please.
Let's have a look. 37 against 60. Yes, a success.
You don't find anything that resembles that, but you do find a few scattered petals around the tomb and some footprints. Faint, but there. They appear to be of a woman's shoe.
Well, and no tracks that might be made by a deer or any other animal?
No.
Are the footprints in the place where I saw that white figure last night?
Because of the distance, you can't be 100% certain. But you saw the figure at the tomb. The footsteps are close to the tomb. They're not directly in front of it, but they're very close to it.
Perhaps it's Eleanor's. Perhaps she visits here, Janitra thinks.
It's certainly possible. When she's spoken of Charlotte, she's certainly spoken of her affectionately.
Yes, it has to be that. That's what she thinks. And nothing else unusual about the tomb?
No,
Nothing left here?
no. As you say, the only thing that's unusual about it is its plainness.
Does that stand out as being different to the rest of the gravestones and the rest of the tombs that from this contemporary time?
To be fair, it's actually relatively in keeping. The dedications on the other gravestones and tombs are generally a little more personalised, but the style overall is in keeping, really.
I think Janitra would have expected at least to say something like beloved wife or some kind of Bible verse, given that she was the wife of a vicar and that there's nothing about, I don't know, you'll see her again, or that may she rest in peace, or anything else like that. And this is slightly troubling because you think that even if the vicar was absolutely prostrate with grief, as Janitra thinks that he was, somebody would have stepped in and somebody would have said, Eleanor would have stepped in and said, look, this is your last memorial to her. You want it to be special and you want it to say how you felt. So this is a bit troubling for her.
It's all very strange, as you say.
And with nothing else in the graveyard that really seems to strike her as worthy of investigation, I guess she'll head back to the house for lunch.
And I think that makes a good place to end it for this session.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Lydia. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been fascinating.
As we're going to do this in 2 parts, we'll do a little bit of a chat about it now, and then we will do another chat at the end of our second session. So, how are you enjoying it so far?
It's so good to be back in the Regency world, where everybody is polite. And even in real life, there was so much occult stuff going on at that point, wasn't there?
It seems right that we did something with it.
It's really mysterious, isn't it? There's a lot to keep track of and lots of moving parts, but it's really interesting.
Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I haven't ever done a one-on-one game other than the Alone Against books. I did Alone Against the Flames. You don't have the rest of the team to help you out and to remind you of the bits that you've forgotten.
One-to-ones are very interesting. Now, I've run one-to-ones for Richard, my husband, when we've been playtesting stuff, and we haven't been able to get anyone else together to do things, but this is my first time running a one-to-one for someone.
Oh, is it?
So I'm also finding it very interesting.
It really kind of ups the mystery, I think, and the sense of suspense and also the horror slowly building of there's something terribly wrong here, because it makes you feel a bit isolated as well.
You're right that you don't have that extra support. It's very intense and demanding because you don't have anywhere to hide. It's you and one other person sort of developing this story together. So it's a fascinating experience.
Definitely. What would you say is the biggest challenge as a keeper, doing a one-to-one game as opposed to what perhaps you'd be more used to with the larger group?
Well, it's basically making sure that it's not just me talking all the time as NPCs. There is a danger of that when you're playing an entire cast and you don't have other player characters that you can hand over to do some of the heavy lifting and help create the story, trying not to make it too much of a burden on you as well to uncover everything. So, no, it's a fascinating experience. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, me too. And you mentioned the NPCs. They're really vivid. I really like them. Harriet, she's quite adorable, isn't she? She really is.
I'm not great at voices, but I am trying.
Oh, no, she's great. And this Reverend, he's clearly got something going on, hasn't he?
What do you think he has got going on? This is a great place to actually see what you think is happening, and then we'll see what actually happens at the end.
Okay. Well, either he was dosing her with this botanical tincture because he thought it would cure her, or he was killing her. You never know which. So either he was trying to cure her, but it's opened some kind of horrible doorway to the mythos. Maybe something came through when she was in some sort of vision. I don't know. Or she knew something, she found something out and he had to get rid of her. I think I want to speak to this squire at some point, this Squire Goodwin. Why is he leaving flowers and the Reverend wasn't? That's something which intrigues me. I think Janitra, she's somebody who rationalizes things to herself, and she can always find an explanation for why somebody is acting the way they are acting. This is the thing about all Call of Cthulhu characters, is that they don't realize they're in Call of Cthulhu. She thinks she's in a Jane Austen novel, but she isn't. So I think seeing that kind of level of rationality chip away as she uncovers more of the mystery is going to be very interesting, because despite my terrible rolls this evening, I've only lost the one sand point, which I think is pretty good given the record I've had. I don't think I've ever had dice rolls as consistently bad as they have been this evening.
They have been spectacularly awful, it has to be said.
There's something, isn't there, about dice rolls? And I think one of the challenges that there must be as a keeper is when you have such terrible rolls from your player, is not locking things behind a failed dice roll. And
exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine that must be really difficult sometimes.
Fail forward. In the bookshop, it took you a very long time and you needed assistance to find something, or you're getting hints of something, you're getting part of it, but you're not getting all of it. And in many ways, that just helps deepen the mystery, which is interesting. But yes, it is an interesting balancing act. And I always try to play fair with players in terms of luck spending. So if it's worth it, I will encourage you to spend luck. If it's not, then we've still got a little bit to go. You might need it.
I was very thankful that you let me re-roll my original luck score.
Yes, that would have been terrible.
That kind of did set the tone for the rolls for the rest of the evening, didn't it?
It really did.
That would have been bad. Oh, as I said, you are a generous keeper, Lynne.
I try.
So, yeah, very, very interesting start to a very deep mystery.
And we will reconvene for the second and final session.
It's been really fun, and I can't wait to see what terrible rolls Miss Janitra Chatterjee fails at next time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.